Those not having privileges of the floor will please vacate the chamber at this time. Chair would ask all members and guests in the galleries to please rise as we are led in prayer today by Pastor Kenny Hayes. The pastor is the guest of the lady from the 32nd, Douglas Staggers.
Would you join me? Our Heavenly Father, we're so thankful to be able to stand in your presence today, Lord, to reach out our hands, Father, to have something that we need from you, which is wisdom, which is strength, which is the power from above to make the decisions that will help govern our great state and be helpful to all the hearts and souls of all the folks that make it up. Lord, we ask you now to be in the midst, Lord, that your strength will be felt by all and your influence will be the guiding force here today. In Jesus' precious name I pray. Amen.
Amen. Members and guests, please remain standing as we are led in the Pledge of Allegiance today by the lady from the 32nd, Douglas Staggers.
Please join with me as we lead our prayer to the flag of the greatest country. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All members and guests may be seated. Reading of the Journal.
Journal of the House of Delegates, Charleston, Saturday, March 2nd, 2019.
Lady from the 32nd, Douglas Kessinger.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I ask unanimous consent that the further reading of the Journal be dispensed with and that it be approved as having been read.
Lady from the 32nd, Douglas Kessinger, asks unanimous consent that further reading of the Journal be dispensed with and to be approved as having been read. Are there objections? Chair hears no objections. Reading of the Journal be dispensed with. Introduction to guests. Gentleman from the 10th, Doug Chris.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Please help me welcome a courageous young adult lady, a BACA child, a hero to many, Hazel Nicole. She is here today with her mother, Anna L. Cunningham, a National Registered Crime Victims Advocate from Parkersburg, West Virginia. Will you please stand? Thank you.
The gentleman from the 22nd, Doug Maynard.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today, in the West Gallery from Lincoln County High School, we have with us Will Carpenter. Will you please stand? Connor Hunting, and they're chaperoned by Will Carpenter. Will the House please make him feel welcome?
The gentleman from the 56th, Doug Howe.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have an entire chapter worth of pages today down from Kaiser Middle School. Please welcome Maddie Harvey, Aiden Castillo, Audrey Williams, Caden Youngblood, Matthew Junkins, Helen McCarty, Kaylee Claus, Victoria Smith, Jenna Rice, Lindsay Nash, Alvia Eidelman, Gay Bryan, Evan Everline, Tanner Hines, Jacob Keating, Marissa Morales, Selena Shears, and Savannah Grimmett. Please make them welcome.
The gentleman from the 5th, Doug Pethel.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Today is American Foundation for Suicide Prevention Advocacy Day, and on each of your desks is a folder about this day. I would hope that you would take a look at it. And today we have several people here for this day. They're in the South Gallery, and as I call their name, I'd ask they please stand and that the House make them welcome. Michelle Toman is the West Virginia Chair and Founder. Barry Fawcett, Cindy Stagg, Sarah Belcher, Karen Saunders, Jason Farabee, Ed Toman, who's Superintendent of Schools in Wetzel County, Kelsey Rudd, Campbell Toman, Andrea Washington, Corey Foster, Lindsay Dunlap, and Mark Mason. I would ask the House make all of them welcome. Thank you.
The gentleman from 36, Doug Robinson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to introduce a classmate of mine from Capitol High School, Jonathan Tucker. Today, Jonathan Tucker is working for Mako Laboratories, Medical Laboratories. He, as we spoke about last year when we introduced these guys, they are a veteran services or veteran employer. They employ veterans to work with the laboratories, and they're also looking at some expansion in West Virginia, so if the House will make him feel welcome.
The gentleman from the 9th, Doug Holland.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The doctor today comes to us from Lewisburg. Please welcome Dr. Vicki Schumann.
The gentleman from the 6th, Doug Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to draw the Chamber's attention to the North Gallery. Accompanying my wife today is one of our grandsons. This one I'm particularly proud of. He volunteered, went to Iraq in 2007, was combat wounded, but God in His mercy brought him back to us. Would you make Derek Hadfield feel welcome in the House chambers today?
The gentleman from the 19th, Delegate Hicks.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On behalf of Delegate Robbie Thompson and myself, I'd like to announce we have a page from Wayne County here, Miss Macy Castle. Macy, would you stand, and House, please make her welcome.
Are there further introductions? If not, yes, the lady in the 48th, Doug Waxman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd again like to welcome Mr. Jay Taylor from Taylor County, a very tenacious advocate for Convention of States. Can the House please make him welcome?
The gentleman from the 56th, Doug Howe.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On an oversight, I forgot to mention those are also paging on behalf of Delegate Rowan and Delegate Hott. Thank you.
Further introductions? If not, report to standing committees.
Committee on Finance has had under consideration Senate Bill 596, adjusting voluntary contribution amounts on certain DMV forms, reports the same back with amendment with recommendation that it do pass.
Report to be received.
Committee on Finances had under consideration Senate Bill 421 relating to annual legislative review economic development tax credit, reports the same back with recommendation that it do pass.
Report to be received.
Committee on Finances had under consideration Committee Substitute for Senate Bill 318, transferring Medicaid Fraud Control Unit to Attorney General's Office, reports the same back with recommendation that it do pass.
Report to be received.
Committee on Government Organization has had under consideration Committee Substitute for Senate Bill 4, relating generally to Municipal Home Rule Program, reports the same back with amendment with recommendation that it do pass.
Report to be received.
Your Joint Committee on Enrolled Bills has examined, found truly enrolled, and on March 4th, 2019, presented to His Excellency the Governor for his action, Committee Substitute for House Bill 2821, updating provisions for command, clerical, and other pay.
Report to be received.
Committee on Judiciary has had it in consideration. Committee Substitute for Senate Bill 238, increasing certain penalties for passing stop school bus. Committee Substitute for Senate Bill 404, relating generally to sediment control during commercial timber harvesting operations. Senate Bill 493, correcting terminology referring to racing vehicles illegally on street. And Committee Substitute for Senate Bill 657, providing consumer protection regarding self-propelled farm equipment, reports the same back with recognition that each do pass.
Report to be received.
Committee on Judiciary has had it in consideration. Committee Substitute for Senate Bill 199, authorizing certain miscellaneous agencies and boards promulgate legislative rules, and Committee Substitute for Senate Bill 600, relating to preservation of biological evidence obtained through criminal investigations and trials, reports the same back with amendment with recommendation that each do pass.
Report to be received.
Committee on Judiciary has had it in consideration. Committee Substitute for Senate Bill 485, clarifying notification requirements for property insurance purposes, reports the same back with recommendation that it do pass.
Report to be received.
Committee on Government Organization has had it in consideration. Committee Substitute for Senate Bill 396, waiving occupational licensing fees for low-income individuals and military families, reports the same back with recommendation that it do pass, that it be referred to Committee on Finance.
Report to be received. Bill be referred to Committee on Finance.
Committee on Government Organization has had it in consideration. Committee Substitute for Senate Bill 615, providing ongoing mechanism for county commissioners to allow compensation increases for elected officials every 2 years, reports the same back with amendment with recommendation that it do pass as amended, that it be referred to Committee on Finance.
Report to be received. Bill be referred to Committee on Finance.
Committee on Government Organization has had it in consideration Senate Bill 658 relating to motor vehicle salesperson licenses, and Senate Bill 676 relating to off-road vehicle recreation, reports the same back with recommendation that each do pass.
Report to be received.
Committee on Government Organization has had it in consideration Committee Substitute for Senate Bill 357 relating generally to Division of Administrative Services. Committee Substitute for Senate Bill 392 relating to payment of invoices received by Division of Corrections and Rehabilitation for contract work. Committee Substitute for Senate Bill 511 creating alternating wine proprietorships. Committee Substitute for Senate Bill 597 conforming state law to federal law for a registration of appraisal management companies. Senate Bill 625, clarifying and defining authority of State Athletic Commission, and Senate Bill 655, relating to conservation districts generally, reports the same back with recommendation that each do pass.
Report to be received.
Committee on Government Organization has had it in consideration. Committee Substitute for Senate Bill 496, transferring authority to regulate milk from DHHR Department of Agriculture, reports the same back with amendment with recommendation that it do pass.
Report to be received.
Committee on Government Organization has had it in consideration. Senate Bill 233 relating to age requirements for Deputy Sheriff. Committee Substitute for Senate Bill 241 permitting county court clerks scan certain documents in electronic form. Committee Substitute for Senate Bill 317, authorizing 3 or more adjacent counties for multi-county trail network authority. Committee Substitute for Senate Bill 400, allowing Board of Dentistry create specialty licenses. Committee Substitute for Senate Bill 402, authorizing Division of Forestry investigate and enforce timber theft violations. Committee Substitute for Senate Bill 405, increasing limit on additional expenses incurred in preparing notice lists for redemption. And Senate Bill 6 633, authorizing the Board of Physical Therapy to conduct criminal background checks on applicants for licenses, reports the same back with amendment with recommendation that each do pass.
Report to be received.
Committee on Education has had under consideration Senate Bill 605, permitting secondary schools athletic commission discipline schools for not following protocol for concussions and head injuries. Senate Bill 672, authorizing school building authority to promulgate legislative rules, and Senate Bill 673, relating to public higher education accountability and planning, reports the same back with recommendation that each do pass.
Report to be received.
Committee on Judiciary has had under consideration Committee substitute for Senate Bill 90, transferring safety and treatment program from DHHR to DMV, reports the same back with amendment with recommendation that it do pass.
Report to be received.
Committee on Government Organization has had under consideration Senate Bill 566, relating to compensation for state athletic commission members, reports the same back with amendment with recommendation that it do pass.
Report to be received. Are there further reports of standing committees? If not, reports of select committees. Message from the executive. Message from the Senate.
The Clerk of the Senate announces the Senate has passed with the title amendment Committee substitute for House Bill 3007, authorizing the Commissioner of Agriculture to require background checks.
Message will be received. Lady from the 49th.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. House Bill 3007, the purpose of this bill is to authorize the Commissioner of Agriculture to require background checks as a condition of employment. The Senate had a title amendment for technical errors. I move that we concur with further title amendment.
The lady from the 49th moves that the House concur in the Senate title amendment. Those in favor of the motion will say aye. Aye. With further title amendment. Chair is in error. There is a further title amendment. Do members have questions about the title amendment? Any member wish to speak to the title amendment? If not, the question for the House is the adoption of the motion that the House concur with further title amendment. Those in favor will say aye. Aye. Those opposed will say no. Ayes have it. Chair declares the title amendment adopted. The question for the House is, shall the bill pass? Those in favor will vote aye. Those opposed will vote no. The clerk will prepare the machine. Has every member voted? If so, the clerk will close the machine and ascertain the result on this question. There are 93 ayes, 3 nays, 4 members absent not voting, a majority of members elected having voted in the affirmative. The chair declares the bill passed. The clerk will please communicate the action of the House to the Senate and request concurrence therein. Next message of the Senate.
The Clerk of the Senate announces the Senate has passed with amendment House Bill 3140, relating to the Division of Natural Resources Infrastructure.
The message will be received. Lady from the 49th.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Senate passed an amendment and a title amendment. The amendment requires the DNR to study the feasibility of the construction of a lodge in Beach Fork State Park and report the same back to the Legislature before December 1st, 2019. I move we concur with the Senate amendment and Senate title amendment.
The lady from the 49th moves that the House concur in the Senate amendments to the bill and to the title amendment. Are the members who wish to speak to the lady's motion? If not, those in favor of the motion will say aye. Aye. Those opposed will say no. Ayes have it. Chair declares the motion adopted. The question for the House is the passage of the bill as amended by the Senate and concurred by the House. Those in favor will vote aye. Those opposed will vote no. The clerk will prepare the machine. Has every member voted? If so, the clerk will close the machine and ascertain the result. On this question, there are 97 ayes, 0 nays, 3 members absent not voting, a majority of members elected having voted in the affirmative. The chair declares the bill passed. The lady from the 49th.
Mr. Speaker, I move the bill take effect from passage.
The lady from the 49th moves the bill be made effective from passage. Those in favor will vote aye. Those opposed will vote no. The clerk will prepare the machine. Has every member voted? If so, the clerk will close the machine and ascertain the result. On this question, lady from the 51st, your vote is not registered. Has every member voted? The clerk will close the machine and ascertain the result. On this question, there are 100 ayes, 0 nays, 0 members absent not voting, 2/3 of members elected having voted in the affirmative. The chair declares the bill effective from passage. The clerk will please communicate the action of the House to the Senate. Next message.
The Senate has passed with amendment Committee substitute for House Bill 2359, relating to exemptions to the commercial driver's license requirements.
Message will be received. Lady from the 49th.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The purpose of this bill allows the DMV to issue restricted commercial driver's license to employees in specified farm-related service industries without that employee having to meet the knowledge or skill test for an unrestricted commercial driver's license. A licensing fee would create a burden on employers and employees because of the limited nature of the license, so that was removed on the last page of the bill, Section C. The fee for the issuance of a restricted commercial driver's license pursuant to this section is $10 for seasonal period. So that was removed. So I move that we concur with further amendment and title amendment.
The lady from the 49th moves that the House concur in the Senate amendments with further amendment and title amendment. The question is on the lady's motion. Are the members who wish to speak to the motion? If not, those in favor of the motion will say aye. Those opposed will say no. The ayes have it. Chair declares the motion adopted. The question before the House is, shall the bill pass? Those in favor will vote aye. Those opposed will vote no. The clerk will prepare the machine. The General 19th, Delegate Thompson, your vote's not registered. Has every member voted? If so, the clerk will close the machine and ascertain the result. On this question, there are 100 ayes, 0 nays, 0 members absent not voting, a majority of members elected having voted in the affirmative. The chair declares the bill passed. The clerk will please communicate the action of the House to the Senate and request concurrence therein. Next message.
The Senate has passed with amendment Committee Substitute for House Bill 2476 relating to the valuation of a motor vehicle involved in an insurance claim.
Message will be received. Lady from the 49th.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To return to Committee Substitute for House Bill 2359, there was additionally a title amendment that was filed. I move that we concur with the title amendment.
The lady's motion did contain that. The House has concurred in the title amendment.
Committee Substitute for House Bill 2473 relating to the valuation of a motor vehicle involved in an insurance claim. 2476, I apologize. The Senate amendment strikes language at the end of the section that may be confusing and is unnecessary to carry out the purpose of the bill. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, I move the House concur with the Senate amendment.
The question before the House is a motion by the lady from the 49th that the House concur in the Senate amendments to Committee Substitute for House Bill 2476. Are there members who wish to speak to the motion? If not, those in favor will say aye. Those opposed will say no. Ayes have it. Chair declares the motion adopted. The House has concurred in the Senate amendments. The question before the House is the adoption of the bill as amended by the Senate. Those in favor will vote aye. Those opposed will vote no. The clerk will prepare the machine. Has every member voted? If so, the clerk will close the machine and ascertain the result. On this question, there are 99 ayes, 1 nay, 0 members absent not voting, a majority of members elected having voted in the affirmative. The chair declares the bill passed. The clerk will please communicate the action of the House to the Senate. Next message.
The Senate has passed with amendment House Bill 2547 relating to the election prohibition zone.
Message will be received. Lady from the 49th.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The purpose of this bill is intended to bring West Virginia into conformity with federal court rulings mandating 100-foot zones in which electioneering is forbidden. The Senate amendment altered the zone to 200 feet, which is not in conformity either with the federal holdings or other provisions of West Virginia Code. Therefore, I move we refuse to concur with the Senate amendment.
The lady from the 49th moves that the House refuse to concur in the Senate amendments. Are there members who wish to speak to the motion? If not, those in favor of the lady's motion will say aye. Those opposed will say no. The ayes have it. The motion is adopted. The House has refused to concur in the Senate amendments. Yep. Clerk will please communicate the action of the House to the Senate and request that the Senate recede. Next messages.
The Senate has passed with amendment House Bill 2691 providing that a license to carry a concealed deadly weapon expires on the holder's birthday.
Message will be received. Lady from the 49th.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The purpose of this bill is intended to provide that a license to carry a concealed deadly weapon expires on the holder's birthday. The Senate committee amendment alters the date these provisions will come into effect. While different from the House bill, it does not alter the intent or effect of the bill. I move we concur with the Senate amendment.
The lady from the 49th moves that the House concur in the Senate amendments to House Bill 2691. Are there members who wish to speak to the motion? If not, those in favor of the lady's motion will say aye. Those opposed will say no. Ayes have it. Chair declares the motion adopted. The House has concurred in the Senate amendments. The question before the House is the passage of the bill as amended by the Senate. Those in favor will vote aye. Those opposed will vote no. The clerk will prepare the machine. Has every member voted? If so, the clerk will close the machine and ascertain the result. On this question, there are 100 ayes, 0 nays, 0 members absent not voting. Majority of members elected having voted in the affirmative. The chair declares the bill passed. Lady from the 49th.
Mr. Speaker, I move that the bill take effect from its passage.
The lady from the 49th moves that the bill be made effective from passage. Those in favor will vote aye. Those opposed will vote no. The clerk will prepare the machine. Has every member voted? If so, the clerk will close the machine and ascertain the result of this question. There are 100 ayes, 0 nays, 0 members absent not voting, 2/3 of members elected having voted in the affirmative. The chair declares the bill effective from passage. The clerk will please communicate the action of the House to the Senate. Next message.
The Senate has concurred in the House amendments and passed Senate Bill 545 relating to HIV testing.
Message will be received. For what purpose does the gentleman from the 19th, Douglas Thompson, seek recognition?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I was not in my seat on the passage of House Bill 3140 and would like to just say that I would have voted in the affirmative on passage if that could be recorded.
Gentleman's preference will be noted.
Thank you.
Are there further messages from the Senate? If not, resolutions, petitions, motions. The lady or the gentleman from the 46, Douglas Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just a point of inquiry on the letter I had written you on, I think it was March 2nd, about the constitutional right of West Virginia on Article 6, Section 29. I just want to make sure that you received that.
Chair is in receipt of it. Yes, sir.
Okay. Do I need to stand up on each bill, or would you just take that from now on?
Gentlemen should stand up on each bill.
Thank you.
Unfinished business. Bills on third reading.
Committee substitute for Senate Bill 3, establishing West Virginia Small Wireless Facilities Deployment Act.
The delegate from the 46, Douglas Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Pursuant to Article 6, Section 29 of the West Virginia Constitution, I requested the bill be read in its entirety.
Clerk will read the bill. The gentleman will remain in his seat the entire time. Clerk will read all 23 pages of the bill.
A bill to amend the Code of West Virginia 1931 as amended by adding thereto a new chapter designated 31H11, 31H12, 31H21, 31H22, 31H23, and 31H24, all relating to the establishment of the West Virginia Small Wireless Facilities Deployment Act, making legislative findings, defining terms, providing for access to public rights-of-way for the co-location of small wireless facilities, providing for certain permit requirements, requiring permits to be issued on a non-discriminatory basis, providing for the collection of fees and setting the amount of fees, and providing for certain zoning, indemnification, insurance, and bonding requirements. Being enacted by the Legislature of West Virginia.
And then the following is the strike and insert adopted.
The following is the strike and insert amendment, adopted amendment. Article 6L, Special, Chapter 11, Taxation. Article 6L, Special Method for Valuation of Certain Wireless Technology Property. 11.6L1, Short Title. This article shall be known and cited as the Wireless Technology Business Property Valuation Act. 11.6L2, Definitions. For the purposes of this article, one tower means a structure which hosts an antenna or other equipment used for the purposes of transmitting cellular or wireless signals for communications purposes, including telephonically or for computing purposes, including any antenna and all associated equipment, and which is constructed or erected between July 1, 2019 and July 1, 2024, and 2, salvage value means 5% of the original cost. 11.6L3, limited time valuation of certain specialized wireless technology property, notwithstanding any other provision of this code to the contrary, for 5 years immediately following the date of its erection. The value of a tower is its salvage value, and a related value determined under a unit valuation approach shall be reduced by the difference between the original cost and the salvage value of the tower. 11.6L4 initial determination, protest, and appeal. The valuation and assessment of any tower subject to this article, including process of protest and appeal from any such valuation, shall be conducted in a manner set forth and fully described in Article 6, Chapter 11 of this code and any applicable legislative rules. 11.6L5, effective date. This article is effective on and after July 1, 2019. Chapter 31G, Broadband Enhancement and Expansion Policies. Article 4, Make Ready Pole Access. 31G.4.4, Public Service Commission Jurisdiction, Rulemaking Enforcement. A, the Public Service Commission shall possess and exercise regulatory jurisdiction over the provisions of this article. The Commission shall administer and adjudicate disputes relating to the issues and procedures provided for under this article. B, the Commission shall adopt the rates, terms, and conditions of access to and use of poles, ducts, conduits, rights-of-way as provided in 47 U.S.C. 224, 47 CFR 1.1401 to 1.1415, inclusive of the dispute resolution process incorporated by reference in those regulations and any subsequent modifications or additions to the provisions of the United States Code or Code of Federal Regulations provisions referenced herein. C, the Commission shall certify to the Federal Communications Commission that this state, as evidenced by the enactment of this article, hereby exercises jurisdiction of the regulation of pole attachments. The certification shall include notice that the state of West Virginia thereby, 1, regulates the rates, terms, and conditions related to pole attachments, and 2, in so regulating such rates, terms, and conditions, the state has the authority to consider and does consider the interests of the subscribers of the services offered via such attachments, as well as the interests of the consumers of the services. 31G.4.5, Electric Power Utilities, Feasibility Study for Providing Broadband Act Services, Public Service Commission to assist, proposed legislation to be developed. Report. For the purposes of this section, 1, Commission shall mean the West Virginia Public Service Commission. 2, Council shall mean the Broadband Enhancement Council as defined in 31G11 of this code. 3, Electric Utility shall mean any electric utility operating within the state that is regulated by the Commission. 4, Project shall mean a middle-income broadband infrastructure expansion project proposed by an electric utility. B, each electric utility may investigate the feasibility of constructing, operating, and proposed within the electric utility distribution system, and if so elect, may submit a feasibility study of a proposed project to the Council on or before December 1st, 2019. Additional feasibility studies may be submitted to the Council after December 1, 2019 without penalty. C, the Council and the Commission shall assist each such electric utility in its preparation of such a feasibility study. D, the feasibility study shall include an evaluation of the following. 1, the scope of the proposed project for which the feasibility study is conducted, which shall include but not be limited to: A, the route of the middle mile infrastructure proposed for the project, the number of fiber strands that would be utilized in connection with the proposed project and dedicated to serve as the middle mile, the location of the electric utilities distribution infrastructure that will be utilized in connection with the proposed project, and the capacity of the middle mile broadband infrastructure that will be available to lease to last mile broadband internet providers upon completion of the proposed project.
B, the estimated cost of the proposed project, including but not limited to engineering costs, construction costs, permitting costs, materials and labor, right-of-way costs, and a reasonable rate of return to the electric utility. C, the proposed schedule of construction of the proposed project, and D, the method of attachment connection of the middle mile broadband fiber assets to the electric utility distribution infrastructure. 2, the regulatory and legal barriers to an electric utility constructing project and operating middle mile broadband infrastructure to provide access to unserved areas of the state as defined in 31G12 of this code. And any underserved areas of the state, proposed legislation to address such regulatory barriers barriers. 3, whether it is in the public interest or the interest of the electric utility to make improvements to the distribution grid in furtherance of providing such middle-mile broadband internet service in conjunction with its program of electric distribution projects. 4, whether it is in the public interest, any interest of the electric utility to operate middle-mile broadband internet assets to provide access to unserved and underserved areas of the state. B, whether it is in the public interest and the interest of the electric utility to permit a third party to lease such capacity to provide last-mile broadband internet services to unserved and underserved areas of the state. C, 6, whether construction of middle-mile broadband internet infrastructure utilizing electric utility distribution system is feasible with respect to the maturity of the relevant technology, the compatibility of such services with existing electric services, and the financial requirements to undertake such project. 7, the anticipated level of rate adjustment necessary to allow the electric utility to recover its costs associated with the proposed project and a reasonable rate of return on an expedited basis that will be recovered by the electric utility through a rate adjustment at the Commission. And 8, such other information that is pertinent to the project. E, upon receipt of a feasibility study, the council shall post the same on the council website for written public comment for a period of 7 days and then shall render a determination by a majority vote of the council as to the feasibility of the proposed project. F, in its consideration of the feasibility of a project, the council shall identify one or more last-mile broadband internet providers that may lease the middle-mile broadband internet capacity created by the proposed project pursuant to lease terms and conditions set by the council. G, the council shall render such feasibility determination within 60 days from the date the feasibility study is submitted to the council. H, commencing January 1, 2020, and each year thereafter, the council shall give a report of its consideration of feasibility studies submitted pursuant to this section of the code to the governor, the president of the Senate, speaker of the House of Delegates, and the Joint Committee on Government and Finance. 31G46, severability. Pursuant to 2210 of this code, if any provision of this article or the application thereof to any person or circumstance is held unconstitutional or invalid, such unconstitutionality or invalidity should not affect other provisions or applications of this article, and to this end, the provisions of this article are declared to be severable. Chapter 31.8, Small Wireless Facilities Deployment Act. Article 1, West Virginia Small Wireless Facilities Deployment Act, 31H11 legislative findings. A, the deployment of reliable small wireless facilities and other next-generation wireless broadband network technology is a matter of statewide concern and critical to the continued economic development and diversification of the state of West Virginia. B, small wireless facilities are critical to delivering wireless access to advanced technology, broadband 911 services to homes, business, and schools throughout the state of West Virginia. C, because of the integral role that the delivery of broadband and wireless technology plays in the economic vitality of the state of West Virginia and in the lives of its citizens, the legislature has determined that a law addressing the further deployment of wireless technology is of vital interest to the state. D, small wireless facilities, including facilities commonly referred to as small cells and distributed antenna systems, may often be deployed most effectively in public rights-of-way. E, to meet the key objective of this chapter, wireless providers must have access to certain public rights-of-way and the ability to attach or collocate on existing infrastructure that will permit these providers to offer next-generation wireless and broadband technology. F, to ensure that public and private West Virginia consumers may benefit from these services as soon as possible, and to ensure that providers of wireless access have a fair and predictable process for deployment of small wireless facilities in a manner consistent with the character of the area in which the small wireless facilities are deployed, the legislature is enacting this chapter, which specifies a regulatory authority for the collocation of small wireless facilities. 31H12. Definitions. As used in this chapter, the following words and phrases have the meaning given to them in this section unless the context clearly indicates otherwise. 1. Antenna means communication equipment that transmits or receives electromagnetic radio frequency signals used in the provision of wireless services. 2. Applicable codes means uniform building, fire, electrical, plumbing, or mechanical codes adopted by a recognized national code organization or local amendments to those codes, including the National Electric Safety Code. 3. Applicant means any person who submits an application as a wireless provider. 4. Application means a request submitted by an applicant to an authority for a permit to collocate small wireless facilities or to approve the installation, modification, or replacement of a utility pole wireless support structure. 5. Authority means the state of West Virginia, a political subdivision that has jurisdiction and control for use of public right-of-ways as provided by this code for replacement within public rights-of-way, or has zoning or land use control for placements not within public rights-of-way. 6. Authority utility pole means a utility pole owned or operated by an authority in a public rights-of-way. 7. Collocate or collocation means to install, mount, maintain, modify, operate, or replace wireless facilities on or adjacent to a wireless support structure or utility pole. 8. Commissioner means a commissioner of the West Virginia Division of Highways. 9. Communication facilities means a set of equipment and network components, including wires, cables, antennas, and associated facilities used by a communication service provider to provide communication service. 10. Communication service means cable service as defined in 47 U.S.C. 522.6 as amended, information service as defined in 47 U.S.C. 153.24 as amended. Telecommunications as defined in 47 U.S.C. 153.53 as amended. Mobile service defined in 47 U.S.C. 153.33 as amended, or wireless service other than mobile service. 11. Communication service provider means any entity that provides communication service. 12. Decorative pole means an authority utility pole that is specially designed and placed for aesthetic purposes and on which no appurtenances or attachment other than a small wireless facility or specifically designed informational or directional signage or temporary holiday or special events attached have been placed or are permitted to be placed according to non-discriminatory municipal rules or codes. 13. Division means the West Virginia Division of Highways. 14. FCC means the Federal Communications Commission of the United States. 15. Fee means a one-time non-recurring charge. 16. Historic district means a group of buildings, properties, or sites that are either listed in the National Register of Historic Places or formally determined eligible for listing by the keeper of the National Register. The individual who has been delegated the authority by the federal agency to list properties determine their eligibility for the National Register in accordance with Section 51AV of the Nationwide Programmatic Agreement codified at 47 CFR Part 1 Appendix C. 17. Law means a federal or state statute, common law, code, rule, regulation, order, a local ordinance, or resolution. 18. Micro wireless facility means a small wireless facility that is not larger in dimension than 24 inches in length, 15 inches in width, and 12 inches in height, and that has an exterior antenna, if any, that is longer than 11 inches. 19. Permit means a written authorization required by an authority to perform an action or initiate, continue, or complete a project. 20. Person means an individual, corporation, limited liability company, partnership, association, trust, or other entity or organization, including an authority. 21. Rate means a recurring charge. 22. Right-of-way means the area on, below, or above a public roadway, highway, street, sidewalk, alley, utility easement, or similar property, but not including a federal interstate highway. 23. Small wireless facility means a wireless facility that meets both of the following qualifications. A. Each antenna could fit within an imaginary closure of no more than 6 cubic feet, and B. All other wireless equipment associated with facilities cumulatively no more than 28 cubic feet in volume. The following types of associated ancillary equipment are not included in the calculation of equipment volume: electric meter, concealment elements, telecommunications demarcation box, ground-based enclosures, grounding equipment, power transfer switch, cutoff switch, and vertical cable runs for the connection of power and communication services. 24. Utility pole means a pole or similar structure that is or may be used in whole or in part by a communication service provider for electric distribution, lighting, traffic control, signage if the pole is 15 feet or taller, or a similar function or the collocation of small wireless facilities. However, utility pole does not include wireless support structures or electric transmission structures. 25. Wireless facility means equipment at a fixed location that enables wireless communications between user equipment and a communications network, including A. Equipment associated with the wireless communications, and B. Radio transceivers, antennas, coaxial or fiber optic cable, regular and backup power supplies, and comparable equipment regardless of technological configuration. Wireless facility includes small wireless facilities. Wireless facility does not include I. The structure or improvements on, under, or within the equipment is collocated, or double I. Wireless backhaul facilities, coaxial or fiber optic cable that is between wireless structures or utility poles or coaxial or fiber optic cable that is otherwise not immediately adjacent to or directly associated with an antenna. 26. Wireless infrastructure provider means any person, including a person authorized to provide telecommunications service in the state, that builds or installs wireless communication transmission equipment, wireless facilities, wireless support structures, or utility poles, but is not a wireless provider. 27. Wireless provider means a wireless infrastructure provider or a wireless provider. 28. Wireless services means any services using licensed or unlicensed spectrum, including the use of Wi-Fi, whether at a fixed location or mobile location, provided to the public using wireless facilities. 29. Wireless service provider means a person who provides wireless services. 30. Wireless support structure means a structure such as a monopole, tower, either guide or self-supporting billboard, other existing or proposed structures designed to support or capable of supporting wireless facilities. Wireless support structure does not include a utility pole. And 31. Wireless backhaul facility is a facility used for the transport of communication service or any other electronic communications by coaxial, fiber optic cable, or any other wire. Article 2. Access to public rights-of-way. 31H21. Use of rights-of-ways for small wireless facilities and utility poles. Other structures. A. The provisions of this section shall only apply to activities of a wireless provider within the right-of-way. B. Except as provided in this chapter, an authority may not prohibit, regulate, or charge for the collocation of small wireless facilities or the installation of utility poles and associated small wireless facilities. C. An authority may not enter into an exclusive agreement with any person for use of the rights-of-way for the collocation of small wireless facilities or the installation, operation, marketing, modification, maintenance, or replacement of utility poles. D. An authority may only charge a wireless provider a rate or fee for the use of the right-of-way with respect to the collocation of small wireless facilities or the installation, maintenance, modification, operation, replacement of a utility pole in the right-of-way if the authority charges other entities for similar use of the right-of-way. Notwithstanding any provision of this article to the contrary, any authority is permitted on a non-discriminatory basis to refrain from charging any rate to a wireless provider for the use of the right-of-way. The rate for occupancy and the use of the right-of-way may not initially exceed $25 per year per small wireless facility. An authority may adjust this rate up to 10% every 5 years. E. Subject to the provision of this section, a wireless provider has the right, as permitted use not subject to zoning review or approval to collocate small wireless facilities and install, maintain, modify, and replace its own utility poles, or with the permission of the owner, a third party's utility pole along, across, upon, and under the right-of-way. Such structures and facilities shall be so installed and maintained as to not obstruct or hinder the usual travel or public safety on such right-of-way, or to obstruct the legal use of such right-of-way by utilities or authorities. F, each new or modified utility pole installed by a wireless provider in the right-of-way may not exceed the greater of 1, 10 feet in height above the tallest existing utility pole in place as of the effective date of this chapter, located within 500 feet of the new pole in the same right-of-way, or 2, 50 feet above ground level. New small wireless facilities in the right-of-way may not extend any more than 10 feet above an existing utility pole in place as of the effective date of this chapter, or B, for small wireless facilities on a new utility pole above the height permitted for a new utility pole pursuant to the provisions of this section. Subject to the provisions of this article, a wireless provider has the right to collocate a small wireless facility and install, maintain, modify, operate, and place its own utility pole, or, with the permission of the owner, a third party's utility pole that exceeds these heights limits along, across, upon, and under the rights-of-way, subject to applicable zoning regulations. G, any authority may adopt reasonable written design guidelines with objective, technically feasible criteria that reasonably match the aesthetics and character of an immediate regarding all of the following. 1, the location of any ground-mounted small wireless facilities. 2, the location of a small facility on a utility pole or wireless support structure. 3, the appearance and concealment of small wireless facilities, including those relating to materials used for arranging, screening, or landscaping. And 4, the design and appearance of a utility pole or wireless support structure. Any such guidelines shall be applied in a non-discriminatory manner. Materials utilized to comply with the appearance and concealment criteria established in the guidelines shall not be considered part of the small wireless facility for purposes of facility size restrictions in this chapter. Each new or modified small wireless facility or utility pole installed in the right-of-way shall comply with an authority's current design guidelines. H, a wireless provider is permitted to replace decorative poles with necessary collocated small wireless facility, but any replacement pole shall reasonably conform to the design aesthetics of the decorative poles being replaced. I, a wireless provider shall comply with written, objective, reasonable, and non-discriminatory requirements that prohibit the installation of structures in the right-of-way in an area designated solely for underground communications and electric lines where, 1, the authority has required all such lines to be placed underground by a certain date that is 3 months prior to the submission of the application. 2, those utility poles which the authority allows to remain shall be made available to wireless providers for the collocation of small wireless facility and may be replaced by a wireless provider to accommodate the collocation of small wireless facilities in compliance with this act. And 3, a wireless provider may install a new utility pole in the designated area that otherwise complies with the other subsection of this section when it is not able to provide wireless service by collocating on a remaining structure. For small wireless facilities installed before an authority adopts requirements of communications and electric lines be placed underground, an authority adopting such requirements shall A, permit a wireless provider to maintain the small wireless facilities and place subject to any applicable pole attachment agreement with the utility pole owner, or B, permit the wireless provider to replace the associated utility pole within 50 feet of the prior location subject to the permission of the utility pole owner. I, or J, subject to provisions of this section, an authority may require reasonable, technical, feasible, non-discriminatory, and technically neutral design or concealment measures in a historic district. Any such design or concealment measure may not have the effect of prohibiting any provider's technology, nor may any such measure be considered a part of small wireless facility for purposes of the size restrictions in the definition of small wireless facility. K, any requirement an authority adopts under subsection G through J, inclusive of this section, must be 1, reasonable, and that they are technically feasible and reasonably directed to avoiding or remedying the intangible public harm of unsightly or out-of-character deployments. 2, no more burdensome than those applied to other types of infrastructure deployments. And 3, objective and published in advance. The authority in the exercise of its administration regulation related to the management of the right-of-way must be competitively neutral with regard to other wireless service providers who are users of the right-of-way, including that terms may not be unreasonable or discriminatory and may not violate any applicable law or effectively prohibit the provisions of wireless services. L, the authority may require a wireless provider to repair all damage to the right-of-way directly caused by the activities of the wireless provider in the right-of-way and to return the right-of-way to its functional equivalents before the damage as determined by the authority pursuant to the competitively neutral, reasonable requirements and specification of the authority. If the wireless provider fails to make the repairs required by the authority within a reasonable time after written notice, the authority may complete those repairs and charge the applicable party reasonable documented cost of such repairs. Regardless of whether the authority or the wireless provider ultimately make the repairs, the authority may assess an additional fine of $100 per day that the wireless provider failed to make the required repairs after the wireless provider received written notice until the repairs were completed. M, nothing in this chapter shall be deemed to impose or otherwise affect any rights, controls, tariffs, or contractual obligations that may be established with regard to utility pole, similar structures, or equipment of any type that are owned or controlled by an investor-owned electric utility whose rates are regulated by the Public Service Commission of West Virginia or any such utilities affiliates, or by an independent transmission company. 31H22, permitting process for small wireless facilities. A, the provision of this section shall apply to the renting of wireless facilities by a wireless provider in or outside the right-of-way as specified in subsection B of this section, to permitting of the installation, modification, and replacement of utility poles by a wireless provider inside the right-of-way. B, small wireless facilities that meet the requirements of 31H21F through 31H21J of this code shall be classified as permitted uses and not subject to zoning review or approval if they are collocated. 1, in the right-of-way in any zone, or 2, outside the right-of-way in property not zoned exclusively for single-family residential use. C, an authority may require an applicant to obtain one or more permits to collocate a small wireless facility that meets the requirements of 31H21F through 31H21J of this code, or to install, modify, or replace a utility pole and associate small wireless facilities that meet the requirements of 31H21F through 31H21J of this code, provided that the permits are general applicability. An authority shall receive applications for, process, and issue permits subject to the following requirements. 1, an authority may not directly or indirectly require an applicant to perform services unrelated to the collocation for which approval is sought, such as in-kind contributions to the authority, including reserving fiber, conduit, or pole space for the authority on the wireless provider's utility pole. 2, an applicant may not be required to provide more information to obtain a permit to communication service providers that are not wireless providers, provided an applicant may be required to include construction and engineering drawings and information demonstrating compliance with the criteria set forth in this subsection. 3, an authority other than the Division of Highways may not require the placement of small wireless fields on any specific utility pole or category of poles, or required multiple antenna systems on a single utility pole, nor the underground replacement of small wireless facilities. 4, an authority other than the Division of Highways may not limit the replacement of small wireless facilities by minimum separation distances. 5, an authority may require an applicant to include an attestation that the small wireless facilities will be operational for use by a wireless provider within 1 year after the permit issuance date, unless the authority and applicant agree to extend this period or delay is caused by lack of commercial power or communication transfer facilities to the site. 6, within 10 days of receiving an application, authority must determine and notify the applicant in writing whether the application is complete. If an application is incomplete, an authority must specifically identify the missing information in writing. The processing deadlines in this subsection are told from the time the authority sends the notice of incompleteness to the time the applicant provides the missing information. That processing deadline also may be told by agreement of the applicant and the authority. 7, an application shall be processed on a non-discriminatory basis and deemed approved if the authority fails to approve or deny the application within 60 days of receipt of the application for a collocation of a small wireless facility and 90 days for an application for the installation, modification, or replacement of a utility pole in the right-of-way. 8, an authority may deny a proposed collocation of a small wireless facility or installation, modification, or replacement of utility pole that meets the requirements of this section only if the proposed application, A, materially interferes with the safe operation or traffic control equipment, B, materially interferes with sight lines or clear zones or transportation or pedestrians, C, materially interferes with compliance with the Americans with Disability Act or similar federal or state standards regarding pedestrian access or movement, D, fails to comply with reasonable non-discriminatory spacing requirements general application adopted by legislative rule or ordinance that concern the location of ground-mounted equipment and new utility poles. Such spacing requirements may not prevent a wireless provider from serving any location. E, fails to comply with applicable codes, legislative rule, and generally applicable standards that are consistent with this chapter and adopted by an authority for construction and public safety in the rights-of-way, including reasonable non-discriminatory writing and cabling requirements, grounding requirements, and abandonment and removal provisions. F, fails to comply with applicable design guidelines adopted with 31H21G of this code, or G, fails to attest that a small wireless facility will comply with relevant federal communications, FCC, regulations concerning 1, radio frequency emissions from radio transmitters, and 2, unacceptable interference with the public safety spectrum and CII spectrum, including compliance with the abatement resolution procedure for interference with public safety spectrum and CII spectrum established by FCC, set forth in 47 CFR 22.970 through 47 CFR 22.973 and 47 CFR 90.672 through 47 CFR 90.675. 9, the authority must document the basis for a denial, including the specific code provisions on which the denial was based, and send the documentation to the applicant on or before the day the authority denies an application. The applicant may cure the deficiencies identified by the authority and resubmit the application within 30 days of denial without paying an additional application fee. The authority shall approve or deny the revised application within 30 days. Any subsequent review shall be limited to the changes made in the resubmission. 10, an applicant seeking to collocate small wireless facility within the jurisdiction of a single authority shall be allowed at the applicant's discretion to file a consolidated application and receive a single permit for the collocation of multiple small wireless facilities. Denial of one or more small wireless facilities in a consolidated application may not delay processing or any other small wireless facilities in the same batch. 11, installation or collocation for which a permit is granted pursuant to this section shall be completed within 1 year after the permit issuance date unless the authority applicant agree to extend this period or a delay is caused by lack of commercial power or communication facilities at the site. Approval of an application authorizes the applicant to 2, A, undertake the installation or colocation, and B, subject to applicable relocation requirements, the applicant's right to terminate at any time, operate and maintain the small wireless facility and associated utility pole installed by the wireless provider or authority utility that is covered by the permit for a period of not less than 10 years, which must be renewed for equivalent duration so long as the small wireless facility utility pole are in compliance with the criteria set forth in this subsection. 12, an authority may not institute, either expressly or de facto, a moratorium on filing, receiving, or processing application or issuing permits or other approvals, if any, for the collocation of small wireless facility or the installation, modification, or replace utility poles to support small wireless facilities. D, an authority may require a permit to work within a right-of-way for any activities under this chapter, if applicable, and may prohibit access when a road is closed or its access is limited to the public, provided that, except for this permit and the other actions explicitly authorized by this chapter, an authority may not require an additional application, approval, or permit, require any fees or other charges from a communication service provider authorized to occupy the right-of-way. 4, 1, routine maintenance. 2, the replacement of wireless facilities with wireless facilities that are substantially similar, same size, or smaller. Or 3, the installation, placement, maintenance, operation, or replacement of micro wireless facilities that are suspended on existing cables that are strung between existing utility poles in compliance with applicable safety codes and the pole owners' construction standards and engineering practices. E, an authority may revoke a permit at any time if the conditions of the permit required pursuant to this article are no longer being satisfied. 31H23, access to authority utility poles, application and permit fees and rates for small wireless facilities. A, an authority shall allow the collocation of small wireless fees on utility poles within the right-of-way subject to the provision of this chapter and the following. 1, any authority may not enter into an exclusive arrangement with any person for the right to attach small wireless facilities to authority utility poles. 2, the rates and fees for collocation on authority utility poles should be non-discriminatory regardless of the service provided by the collocating person. 3, an authority may charge an annual recurring rate to collocate small wireless facilities on an authority utility pole that equals $65 per year per pole. An authority may adjust this rate 10% every 5 years, rounded to the nearest $5. Nothing in this subdivision prohibits a wireless provider and an authority from mutually agreeing to an annual recurring rate of less than $65 to collocate a small wireless facility on an authority utility pole. 4, the rates, fees, and terms for make-ready work must be non-discriminatory, competitively neutral, and commercially reasonable, and must comply with this section. 5, an authority shall provide a good faith estimate for any make-ready work necessary to enable the pole to support the requested collocation by a wireless provider, including pole replacement necessary within 60 days after receipt of a complete application. Make-ready work, including any pole replacement, shall be completed within 60 days of written acceptance of the good faith estimate by the applicant. An authority may require replacement of the authority utility pole only if it demonstrates that the collocation would make the authority utility pole structurally unsound. And 6, the person owning, managing, or controlling the authority utility pole may not require more make-ready work than is required to meet applicable codes or industry standards. Fees for make-ready work may not include costs related to pre-existing or prior damage or non-compliance. Fees for make-ready work, including any pole replacement, may not exceed the actual cost or amount charged to other communication service providers for similar work and may not include any consultant fee or expense. B, for the purpose of the state-owned right-of-way maintained by the Division of Highways, the Commissioner shall propose rules for legislative approval in accordance with the provisions 29A31 et sec. of this code to implement the provisions of the article. C, application fees are subject to the following requirements. 1, an authority may not require a wireless provider to pay any rates, fees, or compensation to the authority or the person other than what is expressly authorized by this chapter. 2, an authority may charge an application fee for collocating a small wireless facility on an existing utility pole not to exceed $200 each for the first 5 small wireless facilities in the same application and $100 for each additional small wireless facility in the same application. An authority may adjust the fee 10% every 5 years, rounded to the nearest $5. 3, an authority may charge an application fee for the installation, modification, replacement of utility pole and the collocation of associated small wireless facility that are permitted uses in accordance with the specifications of this chapter not to exceed $250. An authority may adjust this fee 10% every 5 years, rounded to the nearest $5. And 4, an authority may charge an application fee for installation, modification, replacement of utility pole and the collocation of associated small wireless facilities not a permitted use in accordance with the specification of this chapter not to exceed $1,000. An authority may adjust this fee 10% every 5 years, rounded to the nearest $5. 31H24, local authority miscellaneous provisions. A, nothing in this chapter may be construed to relieve any person from any requirement. 1, to obtain a franchise or state-issued authorization to offer cable television service, or 2, to obtain any required permission to install, place, maintain, or operate communication facilities other than small wireless facilities subject to this chapter. The permitting procedures and authorizations set forth in this chapter apply only to the replacement of small wireless facilities and associated utility poles and do not authorize the installation or operation of a wireline backhaul facility. B, except as provided in this chapter or otherwise specifically specifically authorized by state or federal law, an authority shall not adopt or enforce any regulations or requirements on the placement or operation of communication facilities in a right-of-way by a communication service provider authorized by a state or local law to operate in a right-of-way. C, except as authorized by federal law, this chapter and municipal taxation ordinance authorizing collection of business and occupation taxes since at least November 1, 1998, an authority shall not regulate any communication services or impose or collect any tax, fee, or charge for the provision of communication service over the communication service provider's communication facilities in a right-of-way, to the extent the communication service provider is already paying the authority a fee for access to the right-of-way. D, subject to the provisions of this chapter and applicable federal law, an authority may continue to exercise zoning, land use, planning, and permitting authority with its territorial boundaries with respect to wireless support structure and utility poles. No authority shall have or exercise any jurisdiction or authority over the design, engineering, construction, installation, or operation of any small wireless facility located in an interior structure or upon the site of any campus, stadium, or athletic facility not owned or controlled by the authority, other than to comply with applicable codes. And an authority shall evaluate the structure classification for wireless support structure under the latest version of ANSI TIA 222. Nothing in this chapter authorizes state or any political subdivision, including an authority, to require wireless facility deployment or to regulate wireless services. E, an authority may adopt an ordinance that makes available to wireless provider rates, fees, and other terms that comply with the provisions of this chapter. Subject to the provisions of this section, in the absence of an ordinance that fully complies with this chapter and until such a compliance ordinance is adopted, if at all, wireless providers may install and operate small wireless facilities and utility poles under the requirements of this chapter. An authority and a wireless provider may enter into a voluntary non-discriminatory agreement implementing the provisions of this chapter, but an authority may not require a wireless provider to enter into such an agreement. F, an agreement or ordinance that does not fully comply with this chapter may apply only to small wireless facilities and associated utility poles that become operational or were installed before the effective date of this chapter. Such an agreement or ordinance may not be renewed or extended unless it is modified to fully comply with this chapter. An agreement or ordinance that applies to small wireless facilities and associated utility poles that became operational or were constructed before the effective date of this chapter is invalid and unenforceable beginning on the 181st day after the effective date of this chapter unless it fully complies with this chapter. If an agreement or ordinance is invalid in accordance with this subsection, in the absence of an agreement or ordinance that fully complies with this chapter, and until such a compliant agreement or ordinance is entered or adopted, small wireless facilities and associated utility poles that become operational or were constructed for the effect of this chapter may remain installed and be operated under the requirements of this chapter. G, an agreement or ordinance that applies to small wireless facilities and utility poles that became operational on or after the effective date of this chapter is invalid and enforceable beginning on the effective date of this chapter unless it fully complies with this chapter. If an agreement or ordinance is invalid in accordance with this subsection, in the absence of an agreement or ordinance that fully complies with this chapter and until such a compliant agreement or ordinance is entered or adopted, small wireless facilities, utility poles may be installed and operated in the right-of-way or become operational under the requirements of this chapter. H, any wireless provider who owns or operates small wireless facilities or utility poles in the right-of-way shall indemnify, protect, defend, and hold the authority and its elected officials, officers, employees, agents, and volunteers harmless against any and all claims, lawsuits, judgments, costs, liens, losses, expenses, fees to include reasonable attorney fees, and costs of defense, proceedings, actions, demands, causes of action, liability, suits of any kind and nature, including personal or bodily injury or death, property damage, or other harm for which recovery of damages is sought, to the extent that it is caused by the negligence of the wireless provider who owns or operates small wireless facilities or utility poles in the right-of-way, any agent, officer, director, representative, employee, affiliate, or subcontractor of the wireless provider or their respective officers, agents, employees, directors, or representatives while installing, repairing, or maintaining facilities and rights-of-way. I, except for a wireless provider with an existing franchise to occupy and operate in the rights-of-way, during the period in which the wireless provider's facilities are located on the authority improvements or rights-of-way, the authority may require the wireless provider to carry at the wireless provider's own cost and expense the following insurance. 1, property insurance for its property replacement costs against all risks. 2, workers' compensation insurance as required by law. Or 3, commercial general liability insurance with respect to its activities on the authority improvements or rights-of-way to afford minimum protection limits consistent with its requirements or other users of authority improvements of rights-of-way, including coverage for bodily injury and property damage. An authority may require wireless providers to include the authority as an additional insured on the commercial general liability policy and provide certification documentation of inclusion of the authority in a commercial general liability policy as reasonably required by the authority. A wireless provider may self-insure all or a portion of the insurance coverage and limit requirements required by an authority. A wireless provider that self-insures is not required to the extent of the self-insurance to comply with the requirement for the naming of additional insureds under this section. A wireless provider that elects to self-insure shall provide to the authority evidence sufficient to demonstrate its financial ability to self-insure the insurance coverage and limits required by the authority. J, an authority may impose reasonable and non-discriminatory requirements for bonds, escrow, deposits, letter of credit, or any other type of financial surety to ensure removal of abandoned or unused wireless property or to damage the rights-of-way or authorized authority property caused by the wireless provider or its agent. K, on or before December 31, 2026, all Class 1 and Class 2 municipalities shall report to the Joint Committee on Government and Finance of the effects of the implementation of this article.
question before the House is, shall the bill pass? Are there members who wish to speak to the passage of the bill? The gentleman at 27th, Doug Schott.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You've heard the bill. Now vote for it. All right, let me spend a little more time than that. This is another step in improving broadband capabilities here in West Virginia. As you all who've been here a while know, we've had broadband bills the last 2 sessions. You could call this Broadband 3.0. It's another step in aiding the deployment of reliable small wireless facilities and other next-generation wireless and broadband network. It is the Senate's version of our House Bill 2005, which passed here 98-2 last month. It basically has 4 separate measures. Senate Bill 3, as it passed the Senate, had one of those provisions which dealt with small cell technology. The other 3 were added as the bill came through the House Judiciary Committee. Those were 3 additional provisions in House Bill 2005. The first of these provides for mandated salvage valuation for personal property tax purposes of tangible personal property directly used in certain wireless technology businesses. The second provision allows for West Virginia to take charge of the regulation of pole attachment, which is the control over who fixes cable or lines to a utility pole owned by another utility and how they do it. The third provision is a section empowering the conduct of a feasibility study by electric power providers to determine the likelihood and effectiveness of the installation of broadband fiber within the so-called hot zone of the electrical provider and the leasing of that fiber to broadband entities to cover the cost of that installation. This copies a feasibility study undertaken in Virginia and which has already entered the second stage preparatory to deployment in that state. Finally, we have the small cell bill which passed the House last year 97-2, and that portion deals with regulatory authority for the co-location of small wireless facilities. Small cell wireless technology would essentially bring 5G service to municipalities. It preempts the manner in which a city or other authority may prohibit, regulate, or charge for the co-location of small wireless facilities. As we discussed this past Saturday, there were a few minor technical changes made to the Senate bill and one minor change to incorporate a House amendment relating to moving a utility pole only with the owner's consent and one dealing with emergency communication spectrum. Finally, 3 additional provisions were added, one dealing with the adoption of current federal pole attachment standards by the PSC, one relating to the provision of a comment period for the feasibility study, and one relating to providing clarity in the tower valuation portion of the bill. All of these changes were added with the consent of the affected stakeholders. Mr. Speaker, that's a summary of the bill. I urge its passage.
The gentleman, the 16th, Doug Linville.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Committee on the Judiciary moved to amend the bill by striking out the title and substituting the airport. No, just kidding. Folks, in the governor's office earlier today, there was an announcement including Facebook. And Facebook is putting middle mile fiber through this state over the next 18 to 24 months, spending millions and millions and millions of dollars to connect data centers that they have in Ohio, in Virginia, and in North Carolina. In cooperation with Senator Capito's office, with the governor's office, with the Department of Commerce, and the Broadband Council, much of the provisions of this bill are already being seen and are already being realized and are already being leveraged. Just as I did probably about a month ago, I absolutely, unconditionally, and unequivocally urge passage of this bill. It is great policy. The people of West Virginia deserve this. Your constituents deserve this. You've heard it read. Vote for it.
Are there other members who wish to speak to the passage of the bill? If not, the question before the House is, shall the bill pass? Those in favor will vote aye. Those opposed will vote no. The clerk will prepare the machine. Has every member voted? If so, the clerk will close the machine and ascertain the result. On this question, there are 98 ayes, 1 nay, 1 member absent not voting. A majority of members elected having voted in the affirmative, the chair declares the bill passed. The clerk will please report the title.
Committee substitute for Senate Bill 3, establishing West Virginia Small Wireless Facilities Deployment Act.
Are there amendments to the title?
Committee on Judiciary moves to amend the title of the bill.
Question before the House is the adoption of the title amendment. Are there members who wish to speak to the title amendment? If not, those in favor of the title amendment will say aye. Those opposed will say no. Ayes have it. Chair declares the title amendment adopted. The title as amended by the House will be and remain the title of the bill. Lady from the 49th.
Mr. Speaker, I move the bill effective from its passage.
The lady from the 49th moves the bill be made effective for passage. Those in favor will vote aye. Those opposed will vote no. The clerk will prepare the machine. The adjournment of the 30th, Delegate Bates. Has every member voted? If so, the clerk will close the machine and ascertain the result. On this question, there are 97 ayes, 2 nays, 1 member absent not voting, 2/3 of members elected having voted in the affirmative. Chair declares the bill effective from passage. The clerk will please communicate the action of the House to the Senate and request concurrence therein. Next bill on third reading.
Committee substitute for Senate Bill 72, creating Sexual Assault Victims Bill of Rights.
For what purpose does the gentleman from the 10th, Delegate Chris, seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to amend the bill on third reading.
Delegate Chris asks unanimous consent to that the bill be amended on third reading. Is there objection? Chair hears no objection. Are there amendments?
Delegate Chris moved to amend the bill.
Does the gentleman from the 10th, Delegate Chris, wish to explain the amendment?
Yes, sir, I do.
Gentleman may proceed.
I would like to amend the bill on behalf of a young lady whom is a courageous young lady whom is a BACA child. After enduring many, many horrific years of sexual abuse, including strangulation, gun to the head, knife to the throat, and left for dead. This young lady almost committed suicide after enduring over 15 years of horrific abuse and checked into a treatment center in Logan, West Virginia. Then after being released from the center in 2016, she used her voice and gained empowerment. The young lady has a brother who was physically abused by the same person that abused her, and their mother has a lifetime protective order against their abuser since 2012. I believe all of us should come together and refer to this bill as it's being called Hazel's Law. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The question before the House is the adoption of the amendment as just explained by the gentleman from the 10th, Delegate Chris. Are the members who wish to speak to the adoption of the amendment? If not, those in favor of the amendment will say aye. Those opposed will say no. Ayes have it. Chair declares the amendment adopted. Are there further amendments? If not, the clerk will read the bill a third time.
Committee substitute for Senate Bill 72, creating Sexual Assault Victims Bill of Rights.
The gentleman from the 27th, Delegate Schott, to explain the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This bill establishes a Bill of Rights for sexual assault victims. Most of these rights involve the treatment and preservation of medical evidence. A victim has a right to obtain a medical forensic examination to have that evidence preserved and to be notified if the custodian of the evidence intends to dispose of it. The victim then has the right to demand that the evidence be preserved for an additional period of up to 10 years. The victim also has the right to a personal representative of the victim's choosing to be present at the medical examination or any police interviews or court proceedings. As discussed on Saturday on second reading, the Judiciary Committee added 2 provisions to protect child victims. Those changes reflect protecting established protocols for interviewing and or conducting medical tests on children. Mr. Speaker, that's a summary of the bill. I urge its passage.
The question before the House is, shall the bill pass? Are the members who wish to speak to the passage of the bill? If not, those in favor of the bill will vote aye. Those opposed will vote no. The clerk will prepare the machine. Has every member voted? If so, the clerk will close the machine and ascertain the result. On this question, there are 99 ayes, 0 nays, 1 member absent not voting, a majority of members elected having voted in the affirmative. The chair declares the bill passed. The clerk will please report the title.
Committee substitute for Senate Bill 72, creating Sexual Assault Victims Bill of Rights.
Are there amendments to the title? If not, the title as read by the clerk will be and remain the title of the bill. The clerk will please communicate the action of the House to the Senate and request concurrence therein. Next bill on third reading.
Committee substitute for Senate Bill 393, protecting right to farm.
The gentleman from the 46th, Delegate Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This same request as the last time, Article 6, Section 29.
Clerk will read the bill.
A bill to amend and react 1919-2 of the Code of West Virginia 1931 is amended to amend said code by adding thereto a new section designated 1919-7, all related to the right to farm, providing for an amended definition of agriculture, providing for protections to agricultural operations from nuisance litigation in the facility has been in operation for more than 1 year, providing for the exclusive compensatory damages that may be awarded to a claimant where the alleged nuisance originates from an agriculture operation, and prohibiting punitive damages being awarded to a claimant for nuisance actions originating from an agriculture operation, being enacted by the Legislature of West Virginia. The following is a strike and insert. Article 19, Preservation of Agriculture Production, 1919-2 definitions. For the purposes of this article, A, agriculture shall mean the production of food, fiber, and woodland products by means of cultivation, tillage of the soil, and by the conduct of animal, livestock, dairy, apiary, equine, or poultry husbandry, and the practice forestry, silviculture, horticulture, harvesting of silviculture products, packing, shipping, milling, and marketing of agriculture products conducted by the proprietor of the agriculture operation or any other legal plant or animal production, and all farm practices. B, agricultural land shall mean any amount of land and the improvements thereupon used or usable in the production of food, fiber, woodland products of an annual value of $1,000 or more by the conduct of the business of agriculture as defined in subsection A of this section. C, agriculture operations shall mean any facility utilized for agriculture. 1919-7, additional limitations on nuisance actions. A, the provisions of this section are in addition to limitations on actions brought against an agriculture operation in 1919-4 of this code and shall also apply to any nuisance action brought against an agriculture operation in any court of this state. B, a person may not file a nuisance action to recover damage in which an agricultural operation is alleged to be a public or private nuisance unless 1, he or she is the majority legal landowner, 2, he or she owns property adversely affected by agriculture operation within 1/2 mile of the agriculture operation, and 3, the agriculture operation has materially violated a federal, state, or local law applicable to agriculture. C, no agriculture operation within the state which has been in operation for a period of more than 1 year shall be considered a nuisance, either public or private, as a result of a changed condition in or about the locality where such agriculture operation is located. And any nuisance action, public or private, against an agriculture operation or its principals or employees, proof that the agriculture operation has existed for 1 year or more is an absolute defense to nuisance action if the operation is in compliance with all applicable state and federal laws, regulations, and permits. D, no state or local agency may bring a criminal or civil action against an agriculture operation for an activity that is in material compliance with all applicable state and federal laws, regulations, and permits. E, that no agriculture operation shall be or become a private or public nuisance if the operators are conducting the agriculture operation in a manner consistent with commonly accepted agriculture practice. If the operation is in material compliance with all applicable state and federal laws, regulations, and permits, it shall be presumed to be conducted in a manner consistent with commonly accepted agriculture practice. F, no agriculture operation shall be considered a nuisance, private or public, if the agriculture operation makes a reasonable expansion, so long as the operation is in material compliance with all applicable state and federal laws, regulations, and permits. 1, for the purpose of this section, a reasonable expansion includes, but is not limited to, A, transfer of the agriculture operation, B, purchase of additional land for the agriculture operation, C, introducing technology to an existing agriculture operation, including but not limited to new activities, practices, equipment, and procedure consistent with technological development within the agriculture industry. D, applying Natural Resource Conservation Service Program or other United States Department of Agriculture program to an existing or future agriculture operation, or E, any other change that is related and applied to an existing agriculture operation so long as the change does not affect the agriculture operation's compliance with applicable state and federal laws, regulations, and permits. 2, the reasonable expansion exemption provided by this subsection cannot apply to an expansion that A, creates a substantially adverse effect upon the environment, or B, creates a hazard to public health and safety. G, a requirement of a municipality does not apply to an agriculture operation situated outside of the municipality's corporate boundaries on the effective date of this chapter. If an agriculture operation is subsequently annexed or otherwise brought within the corporate boundaries of a municipality, the requirements of the municipality do not apply to the agriculture operation. H, an agriculture operation is not, nor shall it become, a private or public nuisance after it has been in operation for more than 1 year if such operation was not a nuisance at the time the operation began, and the conditions or circumstances complained of as constituting the basis for the nuisance action exists substantially unchanged since the established date of operation. The established date of operation is the date on which an agriculture operation commenced. I, the provisions of this section shall not apply in any of the following circumstances. 1, whenever a nuisance results from the negligent operation of any such agriculture operation, or 2, to affect or defeat the right of any person to recover for injuries or damages sustained because of an agriculture operation, portion of agriculture operation that is conducted in violation of federal, state, or local statute or governmental requirement that applies to the agriculture operation or portion of agriculture operation. J, the protected status of an agricultural operation once acquired is assignable, alienable, and inheritable. The protected status of an agricultural operation once acquired may not be waived by the temporary cessation of operation by diminishing the size of the operation. 1919-8 damages. A person who brings a nuisance action for damages or injunctive relief against an agricultural operation that has existed for 1 year or more prior to the date this action is due or for violation of provisions of 1919-7H of this code is liable to the agricultural operator for all costs and expenses incurred in defense of the action, including but not limited to attorney fees, court costs, travel, and other related incidental expenses incurred in the defense. B, in no event shall the total amount of damages in any successful nuisance action exceed the diminished value of the subject property. C, the excuse of compensatory damages that may be awarded to a claimant where the alleged nuisance originates from an agricultural operation shall be as follows. 1, if the nuisance is determined to be a permanent nuisance, compensatory damages shall be limited to the reduction in the fair market value of the claimant's property caused by the nuisance, not to exceed the fair market value of the claimant's property. And 2, if the nuisance is determined to be a temporary nuisance, compensatory damages shall be limited to the diminution of the fair rental value of the claimant's property caused by the nuisance. D, if any claimant or claimant successor in interest brings a subsequent private nuisance action against any agricultural operation, the combined recovery from all such actions shall not exceed the fair market value of his or her property. This limitation applies regardless of whether the subsequent action or actions were brought against a different defendant than the preceding actions or actions. E, a claimant shall not be awarded punitive damage for nuisance action originating from an agriculture operation.
The adjournment 27th, Delegate Schott. The question before the House is, shall the bill pass? The gentleman from the 27th is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Senate Bill 393 expands statutory protections of the right to farm from nuisance litigation if the facility has been in operation for more than 1 year. Let me make it clear that it offers no protection for negligent actions, in other words, actions based upon the negligent operation of the facility. It does provide protections for nuisance actions. The bill provides that no agricultural operation which has been in operation for more than 1 year shall be considered a nuisance as a result of any changed condition in or about the locality where the operation is located. State and local agencies are also barred from bringing actions against an agricultural operation for an activity that is in material compliance with all applicable state and federal law. The bill provides that no agricultural operation shall be or become a nuisance if operations are conducted in a manner consistent with commonly accepted agricultural practice. An operation that is in material compliance with applicable state and federal laws shall be presumed to be conducted in a manner consistent with commonly accepted agricultural practice. The bill also provides that no agricultural operation shall be considered a nuisance if it makes a reasonable expansion, so long as, first, the operation is in material compliance with applicable state and federal laws, and second, it does not create a substantially adverse effect upon the environment or a hazard to public health and safety. The bill provides that municipal requirements are not applicable to an agricultural operation situated outside of the municipality's corporate boundaries on the effective date of this chapter. The protections in this bill do not apply when a nuisance results from negligent operation, when they do not apply to defeat the right of a person to recover for injuries or damages sustained because of an agricultural operation that is conducted in violation of applicable state or federal law. The protected status of an agricultural operation is assignable, and it may not be waived by the temporary cessation of operations or by diminishing the size of the operation. The bill makes a person who brings an action against a protected agricultural operation in effect for more than 1 year liable for all costs and expenses incurred in defense of the action, and the bill provides limitations on compensatory damages and caps damages for any successful nuisance action at the diminished value of the subject property. Mr. Speaker, that's a summary of the bill. I urge its passage.
The question before the House is, shall the bill pass? Are the members who wish to speak to the passage of the bill? If not, those in favor will vote aye. Those opposed will vote no. The clerk will prepare the machine. Has every member voted? If so, the clerk will close the machine and ascertain the result. On this question, there are 97 ayes, 1 nay, 2 members absent not voting, a majority of members elected having voted in the affirmative. The chair declares the bill passed. The clerk will please report the title.
Committee substitute for Senate Bill 393.
Are there amendments to the title?
Delegate Schott moves to amend the title of the bill.
The question before the House is the adoption of the title amendment. Those in favor of the title amendment will say aye. Those opposed will say no. Ayes have it. Chair declares the title amendment adopted. The title as amended by the House will be and remain the title of the bill. The clerk will please communicate the action of the House to the Senate and request concurrence therein. Next bill on third reading.
Committee substitute for Senate Bill 441 relating to higher education campus police officers.
The gentleman of 46, Douglas Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Same request that be read.
Clerk will read the bill.
An act to amend and reenact 18B45 of the Code of West Virginia 1931's amendment relating to campus police officers of state institutions of higher learning and allowing governing boards of state institutions of higher learning to appoint all qualified individuals to serve as campus police officers. Being enacted by the Legislature of West Virginia, Article 4, General Administration, 18B45, Campus Police Officer Appointment, Qualifications, Authority, Compensation, Removal, Law Enforcement Grants. A, the governing boards may appoint qualified individuals to serve as campus police officers upon any premises owned or leased by the state of West Virginia under the jurisdiction of the governing board, subject to the conditions and restrictions established in this section. 1, a person who previously was qualified for employment as a law enforcement officer for an agency or political subdivision of any state is considered qualified for appointment as a campus police officer. 2, before performing duties as a campus police officer in any county, a person shall qualify as required of any county police officers by A, taking and filing an oath of office required by 611 et sec of this code, and B, posting an official bond as required by 621 et sec of this code. B, a campus police officer may carry a gun and any other dangerous weapon while on duty if the officer fulfills the certification requirement for law enforcement officers under 3029.5 of this code or meets requirements of subsection A of this section. C, if it is the duty of a campus police officer to preserve law and order, 1, on the premises under the jurisdiction of the governing board, and 2, on any street, road, or thoroughfare except controlled access and open country highways immediately adjacent to or passing through premises to which the officer is assigned by the president of the institution. A, for the purpose of this subdivision, the campus police officer is a law enforcement officer pursuant to the provisions of 3029.1 et sec of this code. B, the officer has and may exercise all the powers and authority of a law enforcement officer as to the offenses committed within the area assigned. C, the officer is subject to all the requirements and responsibility of a law enforcement officer. D, authority assigned pursuant to this subdivision does not supersede in any way the authority or duty of other law enforcement officers to preserve law and order on such premises. E, campus police officers may assist a local law enforcement agency or on public highways. The assistance may be provided to control traffic in and around premises owned by the state when I, traffic is generated as a result of athletic or other activities conducted or sponsored by the institution, and I, the assistance has been requested by local law enforcement agency, and F, campus police officers may assist a local law enforcement agency in any location under the agency's jurisdiction at the request of the agency. D, the salary of a campus police officer is paid by the employing governing board. A state institution may furnish each campus police officer with a firearm and an official uniform to be worn while on duty. The institution shall furnish and require each officer while on duty to wear a shield with an appropriate inscription and to carry credentials certifying the person's identity and authority as a campus police officer. E, a governing board may at its pleasure revoke the authority of any campus police officer, and such officers serve at the will and pleasure of the governing board. The president of the state institution shall report the termination of employment of a campus police officer by filing a notice to that effect in the office of the clerk of each county in which campus police officer's oath of office was filed. F, notwithstanding any other provisions of this code to the contrary, and if for purpose of enhancing the ability of campus police officers to perform their duties, the governing board may apply for and receive any public or private grant or other financial award that is available to other law enforcement agencies in the state.
The question before the House is, shall the bill pass? The gentleman of the 48th, Douglas Hamrick.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Committee substitute allows higher educational institution governing boards to widen their campus police officer applicants to out-of-state applicants. I urge passage.
Are there members who wish to speak to the passage of the bill? If not, those in favor will vote aye. Those opposed will vote no. The clerk will prepare the machine. Has every member voted? If so, the clerk will close the machine and ascertain the result. On this question, there are 97 ayes, 0 nays, 3 members absent not voting, a majority of members elected having voted in the affirmative. The chair declares the bill passed. The clerk will please report the title.
Committee substitute for Senate Bill 441 relating to higher education campus police officers.
Are there amendments to the title? If not, the title as read by the clerk will bring the title of the bill. The clerk will please communicate the action of the House to the Senate. Next bill on third reading.
Committee substitute for Senate Bill 520 requiring entities to report drug overdoses.
The gentleman from the 27th, Douglas Ellington, to explain the bill.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This bill requires reporting of a suspected overdose within 72 hours after the provider responds to the incident and through the appropriate information technology platform. This will reduce duplicative overdose reporting. Mr. Speaker, I urge passage.
The question before the House is, shall the bill pass? Are there members who wish to speak to the passage of the bill? If not, those in favor will vote aye. Those opposed will vote no. The clerk will prepare the machine. Has every member voted? If so, the clerk will close the machine and ascertain the result. On this question, there are 98 ayes, 0 nays, 2 members absent not voting, a majority of members elected having voted in the affirmative. The chair declares the bill passed. The clerk will please report the title.
Committee substitute for Senate Bill 520, requiring entities to report drug overdoses.
Are there amendments to the title? If not, the title as read by the clerk will be enumerated the title of the bill. The clerk will please communicate the action of the House to the Senate. For what purpose does the adjournment from the 16th delegate Linville seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to record that had I been in my seat for the previous vote, I would have voted in the affirmative.
Gentleman's preference will be noted. Next bill on third reading.
Senate Bill 635, relating generally to coal mining activities.
The gentleman from the 8th, Douglas Anderson, to explain the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You will not get as extent. I explained the bill extensively on second reading. To summarize, this bill basically is an agreed-to bill among both the industry and labor to update provisions relating to mine safety regulations. It makes the changes I listed in greater detail on Saturday. The House amended the Senate bill to make certain technical changes to the provisions dealing with the Mine Trespass Act, which were altered by a floor amendment in the Senate. Specifically, it notes that these provisions also apply to inactive workings, as well as active or abandoned workings. It clarifies the language relating to subsequent convictions, and note these must be for the same offense, and removes any ambiguity in the section relating to underground mine trespass to note that only inactive or abandoned workings must be sealed or posted for a trespass conviction to occur. It also made other cleanup agreed to by the Senate. Mr. Speaker, that is the summary of the bill, and I urge its adoption, or its passage.
The question before the House is, shall the bill pass? The gentleman from the 25th, Douglas Painter.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank the leadership here, and I'd like to thank the council and the Energy and Judiciary Committees for taking my mine trespassing bill and inserting it in its entirety into this bill and making it something that I could actually support. They've turned it into a pretty good bill, and I'd like to thank them for it and encourage everybody to vote yes.
The gentleman from the 26th, Douglas Evans.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I stand in support of Senate Bill 636. This bill, 35, I apologize. This bill will benefit the coal mine and coal field communities of West Virginia by preserving coal mine jobs. Mr. Speaker, last week these galleries were absolutely full of coal miners that traveled here to support this bill. This bill is proof that labor and industry can work together to produce coal legislation that protects jobs and the environment. It keeps underground mines safe while ensuring proper training for our miners. The most important thing that comes out of a coal mine is the coal miner. The bill also provides that those trespassing on these mines that have been sealed or inactive will be properly dealt with criminal penalties. Mr. Speaker, I urge passage.
The gentleman of the 67th, Douglas Doyle.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would the gentleman from Wood, Chair of Energy, yield to a question?
Certainly, Mr. Speaker.
Sir, I was looking down through here, and obviously I'm not on the Energy Committee, so I don't know very much about it, but I noticed that in several places through here, the reference to requiring a community impact statement has been eliminated. Can you tell me why that was?
Sir, basically the community impact statement was eliminated in an effort to promote consultation by not filing the paperwork, but consultation between the different entities involved.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Are there other members who wish to speak to the passage of the bill? Does the gentleman from the 8th, Douglas Anderson, wish to close debate on the bill?
I urge the passage of the bill.
The question before the House is, shall the bill pass? Those in favor will vote aye. Those opposed will vote no. The clerk will prepare the machine. Has every member voted? If so, the clerk will close the machine and ascertain the result. On this question, there are 99 ayes, 0 nays, 1 member absent not voting. A majority of members elected having voted in the affirmative, the chair declares the bill passed. The clerk will please report the title.
Senate Bill 635, relating generally to coal mining activities.
Are there amendments to the title?
Yeah, Delegate Anderson moves to amend the title of the bill.
Question before the House is the adoption of the title amendment. Those in favor of the title amendment will say aye. Those opposed will say no. Ayes have it. Chair declares the title amendment adopted. The title as amended by the House will be and remain the title of the bill. The lady from the 49th.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move the bill effective from passage.
The lady from the 49th moves the bill be made effective from passage. Those in favor will vote aye. Those opposed will vote no. The clerk will prepare the machine. Has every member voted? If so, the clerk will close the machine and ascertain the result. On this question, there are 99 ayes, 0 nays, 1 member absent not voting. 2/3 members elected having voted in the affirmative. The chair declares the bill effective from passage. The clerk will please communicate the action of the House to the Senate and request concurrence therein. Next bill on third reading.
Senate Bill 636, authorizing legislative rules for Higher Education Policy Commission.
The gentleman from the 48th, Delegate Hamrick, to explain the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Senate Bill 636 ratifies Higher Education Policy Commission and Community and Technical Council legislative rules and repeals rules that have been reviewed and authorized by Lucia. I urge passage.
The question before the House is, shall the bill pass? Those are the members who wish to speak to the passage of the bill. If not, those in favor will vote aye. Those opposed will vote no. The clerk will prepare the machine. Has every member voted? If so, the clerk will close the machine and ascertain the result. On this question, there are 99 ayes, 0 nays, 1 member absent not voting. A majority of members elected having voted in the affirmative. The chair declares the bill passed. The clerk will please report the title.
Senate Bill 636, authorizing legislative rules for Higher Education Policy Commission.
Are there amendments to the title? If not, the title as read by the clerk will be and remain the title of the bill. For what purpose does the gentleman on the 34th, Doug Boggs, seek recognition?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Had I been in the chamber on roll calls number 426 and 427, I would have voted in the affirmative on both.
Clerk will please note the gentleman's preference in the journal. The lady from the 49th.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move the bill take effect from its passage.
The lady from the 49th moves that Senate Bill 636 be made effective from passage. Those in favor will vote aye. Those opposed will vote no. The clerk will prepare the machine. Has every member voted? If so, the clerk will close the machine and ascertain the result. On this question, there are 99 ayes, 0 nays, 1 member absent not voting. 2/3 members elected having voted in the affirmative. The chair declares the bill effective from passage. The clerk will please communicate the action of the House to the Senate. Next bill on third reading.
Senate Bill 668, relating to physician assistants collaborating with physicians in hospitals.
The gentleman from the 27th, Delegate Ellington, to explain the bill.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This bill permits a physician assistant to work in a hospital setting by submitting a practice notification to either the Board of Medicine or the Board of Osteopathic Medicine in place of a collaborative agreement. This reduces the amount of paperwork a hospital-based physician assistant needs to fill out. This is appropriate because the setting inherently places structure and limitations upon the physician assistant. Mr. Speaker, I urge passage.
The question before the House is, shall the bill pass? Are there members who wish to speak to the passage of the bill? If not, those in favor will vote aye. Those opposed will vote no. The clerk will prepare the machine. Has every member voted? If so, the clerk will close the machine and ascertain the result. On this question, there are 99 ayes, 0 nays, 1 member absent not voting. A majority of members elected having voted in the affirmative. The chair declares the bill passed. The clerk will please report the title.
Senate Bill 668, relating to physician assistants collaborating with physicians in hospitals.
Are there amendments to the title? If not, the title as read by the clerk will be and remain the title of the bill. The clerk will please communicate the action of the House to the Senate. Are there further bills on third reading? If not, bills on second reading.
Committee substitute for Senate Bill 100, increasing court fees to fund law enforcement standards, training, and expenses.
Are there amendments? No. If not, the bill will be advanced.
Committee substitute for Senate Bill 101, equalizing penalties for intimidating and retaliating against certain public officers and other persons.
Are there amendments? If not, the bill will be advanced.
Committee substitute for Senate Bill 154, using school facilities for funeral and memorial services for certain community members.
Are there amendments? If not, the bill will be advanced.
Committee substitute for Senate Bill 163, authorizing DEP promulgate legislative rules.
Are there amendments?
Delegate Hansen moves to amend the bill.
Does the gentleman from the 51st, Delegate Hansen, wish to explain the amendment?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman may proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The amendment in the system is on behalf of 10 delegates. This is a rules package, and this amendment is for one of the rules in the rules package related to water quality standards, and more particularly related to human health water quality standards. West Virginia has the third highest cancer death rate in the country, and these rules will impact the amount of cancer-causing pollutants that are allowed in our rivers and streams and potentially into our drinking water. These are drinking water related human health water quality standards. And the impact of the amendment would be to return the rule to the version that was filed by the Department of Environmental Protection in July before it came to this legislature. The Department of Environmental Protection has provided testimony in committee hearings and has stood behind the science that they used to update these water quality standards. Many of these, or most of these human health water quality standards have not been updated since the 1980s. Some have been updated more recently, but most are using 1980s data and 1980s science. The DEP went through a process starting in 2015 to collect information from stakeholders and to update these standards. And instead of accepting the federal recommendations at face value, they actually recalculated them using some state-specific data. And in addition, instead of accepting all 94 updated standards from the EPA, they're only proposing to update 60 of those, the 60 that are already in our standards. And it's important to note that if we follow the best science and the best data on these human health standards, that doesn't mean that all 60 of them are getting more stringent. About 2/3 get more stringent, but about 1/3 get less stringent. So this is not just about having less carcinogens and less toxins in our water. It's about updating our science and letting our policy follow the science no matter which direction it goes. I don't know about you, but I've gotten hundreds of emails from people all across West Virginia asking us to update the standards based on the best science, and that's exactly what this amendment does. So, Mr. Speaker, I reserve the right to close. Thank you.
The question before the House is the adoption of the amendment as just explained by the gentleman from the 51st. The gentleman from the 8th, Douglas Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in opposition to the amendment from the gentleman from Montague. This amendment was considered before the Energy Committee, and at that particular time, it is an effort to further the discussion of the science. Elements of the industry were asking for this rule to be basically delayed for a couple of years until they can submit additional information pursuant to the situation in West Virginia for consideration by the DEP. This amendment was considered in the Energy Committee and rejected. I would ask the House to reject the amendment at this time. Thank you.
The gentleman from the 67th, Douglas Doyle.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We very much need to adopt this amendment. For too long, we've been weakening our water quality standards. This one doesn't necessarily weaken it, but it robs us of a chance to get cleaner drinking water in our state. Many people recently have been saying that we've got to have dirty water in order to have jobs. I categorically reject that point of view. I think the cleaner our water, the more and better jobs we're going to get. So let's adopt this amendment.
The gentleman of the 7th, Douglas Harshbarger.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I stand in opposition to this amendment. As we heard in committee and several different witnesses, only 3 states have adopted these new water criteria, and the reason is there's a lot of caution out there how far these water criteria go. You know, I'm a strong believer in protecting our water quality, but some of these are down to a point of our technology can't even detect these lower limits. They basically go as a non-detect. So once technology changes, where's that going to put our industry trying to meet these limits? Texas, for instance, implemented these, and they didn't use the fish consumption, the body weight criteria that the EPA used. So I think we need to proceed with a lot of caution of the impact this is going to have on our industry. So I oppose his amendment. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman from the 10th, Dr. Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I also stand in opposition to the amendment. This amendment was discussed thoroughly in the Energy Committee last week, and it was pretty much accepted that this didn't need to happen. Very few states nationwide have accepted or adopted these standards, and they work against everything that we are trying to make in the state of West Virginia right now. So I would encourage a no vote on this amendment. Thank you.
The gentleman, the 32nd, Dr. Fast.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I absolutely disagree with the notion that we need to have dirty water so that we can have jobs. I don't believe that's what's going on here. We also considered this matter in judiciary, and the information from the DEP that was told to us is that if we reinserted these standards, that 35 of the numbers would go up and 25 of the numbers would go down. But what we didn't hear of the 25 that would go down or the ones that would go up, which one carried the most weight. All of these standards carry various aspects of weight when it comes to what's clean water and what's not clean water. And so I believe that makes a lot of sense why there needs to be further study on this matter. This is not just kicking the can down the road, but the information is just not available right now to make a definitive determination whether this would help or whether this would hurt. So I don't want dirty drinking water. I don't think anyone does. But would this help or would it not? And so I think that's the unanswered question, and I'm not willing to gamble on creating a situation that could, in fact, create less clean water. So for that reason, Mr. Speaker, I urge rejection of the amendment.
The lady from the 51st, Dr. Fleischauer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Hello? Is anyone listening to the people of West Virginia who were 300,000 of whom had water that was poisoned by a toxic discharge of a chemical that isn't even on this list? Our DEP has said these are evidence-based. They are not going as far as the Trump EPA. I think that our citizens demand clean drinking water. And Mr. Speaker, I demand a roll call vote.
The gentleman from the 13th, Dr. Cato.
Mr. Speaker, yeah, let's talk about the chemical spill down at Freedom Industries, where they were told to ignore those people basically and not bother them because they partied on a boat with the right people. So they overlooked it, didn't check anything out. That could have been avoided. All the rules were in place. That all could have been avoided. But they chose not to inspect the place and let them get by with everything. So why do we need to give more rules to people who don't enforce the rules we have now? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman from the 15th, Dr. Foster.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I go through a couple things where this went through the Legislative Rulemaking Review Committee, came through Legislative Rulemaking Review, and when we talked to the agency, the department with DEP, they were not required. Basically, we asked, it wasn't that the committee amended it or changed the rule, it was an agreed to modification. So what that is the DEP agreed to pull these out for further study because of the public comment period being the concerns of the people of the state, including many people, including the coal industry and more, because of what the gentleman from the 7th mentioned earlier, that some of these requirements aren't even of a measurable factor. It'd be like me asking you how many nanograms you weighed to the exact nanogram. You're not going to be able to tell me that. And I don't think we should be doing something that asks us to measure something that adequate technology is not out there to measure. Plus also, there's only 3 states that have adopted any of these standards, and two of the 3 have agreed to basically modifications to their rule that comport with their state. So they've taken it back and dialed it back a little bit and said, hey, this isn't adequate. But what you're not remembering is our state's different. Some of these states, they've already adopted these, have no human health criteria drinking water standards in their NDPS permits because they're not a Category A water stream. All the waters in our state are a Category A water stream, meaning drinking water quality. So no matter where the discharge would be at, it's considered drinking water. So our state as a whole, anywhere on any of our streams or rivers are held at a higher standard. And that's why we should be concerned and be careful about what we do here. And whenever you look at those water quality standards, all this does, the current language, not the amendment, but the current language allows for some time frame for the most adequate. I know there's currently studies being done to comport these recommendations from EPA to our state. And that's what we're looking at, is getting the most adequate, most recent science to make sure we're balancing the odds of the changes the EPA recommended and also the recommendations of the industry that may have problems abiding by these rules. So I would urge rejection of the amendment. It's not going to, and as the lady from 51st said herself, it wouldn't do nothing to change the incident with the Freedom Industries spill. And also on top of that, I would ask unanimous consent that the gentlelady's remarks from the 51st regarding her support of the Trump administration be recorded in the appendix of the Journal.
The gentleman is 60th, Douglas Wilson.
Mr. Speaker, would the chairman please yield?
Which chairman does the
chairman of Energy, sir?
Thank you. Delegate Anderson?
Yes, sir. My apologies. Sir. Thank you, sir. I appreciate you. I'm not on your committee, so of course I wasn't privy to most of this discussion. Please help me out here. How would the adoption of this amendment prevent future incidents of catastrophic discharge like was mentioned by the lady from the 51st?
It would do nothing to prevent catastrophic discharge such as occurred in Freedom Industries.
So not relevant?
It's not relevant to the thrust of this bill.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you.
The gentleman, the 22nd, Delegate Jeffries.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I asked for Rule 49. My wife actually works for the DEP in compliance monitoring for the Division of Wastewater.
Under the facts as the gentleman just described it, the gentleman would be a part of a class of greater than 5 members, therefore would be directed to vote. The lady from the 51st, Dr. Fleischauer.
Thank you. I would just like to respond to the questions about the relevancy. These particular, we didn't know as much as we know now about the chemical that was spilled in the Freedom spill. We do know about the chemicals on this list, like cyanide, which will be allowed to go up because of the adoption of this. These are toxic and cancer-causing chemicals. So the difference is, even though this passage of this wouldn't have stopped that, this bill, if we adopt the gentleman's amendment, will stop things that are way worse. We do not want toxic and cancer-causing chemicals into our water, and we want to base our decision on the best science. I urge adoption of the amendment.
Do the sponsors wish to close debate on the amendment? The gentleman, the 51st, Douglas Hanson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would just like to respond briefly to a couple points that have been raised. First, related to what happened at the Legislative Rulemaking Review Committee several months ago. When this rule was being considered, the DEP was asked if they would be amenable to refiling the rule if they were told to remove these 60 updates, and they said yes. They were not asked at rulemaking whether they supported the science behind the rule. They were simply asked, if we tell you to take it back and refile, will you do so? And that's what they answered, and that's what they did. Science evolves over time as we learn more and as we collect more data. And it's always a challenge with something like this, because where do you draw the line? Where do you say we know enough that we could put it into our rule and then go back in a couple of years and update it again? There's nothing at all preventing us from adopting the July updates today and then going back and adjusting them in a couple of years. But if we don't update them today and just wait another couple of years, we're just pushing it further and further into the future as those 1980s standards stay on the books. Let me also just mention that primarily this will impact, if it does impact them, permittees who discharge under Clean Water Act permits into rivers and streams. But there's been no testimony provided to the committees from these companies to demonstrate that it will actually impact them. In Energy Committee, I asked for a representative of Dow to come up and testify, and the person who they provided told me that I needed to submit my questions in writing, and they would answer those questions after we took the vote. That was the process that was followed. And I was legitimately, genuinely interested to understand how this might impact them and other companies that have these permits, because it's an important issue. But many of these pollutants are already in their permits. They're already in their permits at such low levels that they only have to show non-detect at the lab. This issue of not being able to detect these pollutants at such low quantities, that's already an issue that we have with our current water quality standards and with our current permits. The agency and the permittees already address that issue. It's nothing new. We already handle that situation. And even if it did impact a company like Dow, their permits are being renewed right now for 5 years, and those permits cannot be reopened during those 5 years for this purpose. And even 5 years from now, the DEP could give them a compliance schedule to give them several more years to actually comply with these new standards. So we're talking about the possibility of impacting the discharger maybe 8 to 10 years in the future. There's nothing imminent here that's going to impact a discharger, if it impacts them at all. And I'll conclude by saying, yes, it's true that few states have gone ahead and updated their human health criteria so far. This is an opportunity for us to take the lead among other states across the country.
The question before the House is the adoption of the amendment as explained by the gentleman from the 51st. A roll call has been demanded. Is demand sustained? Demand is sustained. Those in favor of the amendment will vote aye. Those opposed will vote no. The clerk will prepare the machine. Has every member voted? If so, the clerk will close the machine and ascertain the result. On this question, there are 34 ayes, 64 nays, 2 members absent, not voting, less than a majority in favor. Having voted in the affirmative, chair declares the amendment lost. Are there further amendments? If not, the bill will be advanced. Next bill on second reading.
Committee substitute for Senate Bill 175, authorizing DHHR promulgate legislative rules.
Are there amendments?
Committee on Judiciary moves to amend the bill. This is H. Jude AM number 1.
Does the gentleman at 27th, Delegate Shaw, wish to explain the amendment? The gentleman at 27th, Delegate Ellington, to explain the amendment.
Yeah, the other gentleman from 27th. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This amendment has 2 parts to it that were adopted in committee. The first is to the Behavioral Health Center licensure rules, which permits OFLAC to approve through a reciprocal agreement a behavioral health center in another state. This was added to permit out-of-state facilities, which are West Virginia Medicaid providers, to provide mental health services. The second amendment is to the office-based medication-assisted treatment rule, which requires a provider to provide information concerning birth control options to the MAT patient. Mr. Speaker, I urge adoption of the amendment.
The question before the House is the adoption of the amendment as just explained by the gentleman at 27th. Are there members who wish to speak to the adoption of the amendment? If not, those in favor of the amendment will say aye. Those opposed will say no. Ayes have it. Chair declares the amendment adopted. Are there further amendments? If not, the bill will be advanced.
Senate Bill 190, DOH rule relating to employment procedures.
Are there amendments? If not, the bill will be advanced.
Committee substitute for Senate Bill 223, authorizing Department of Commerce promulgate legislative rules.
Are there amendments?
Delegate Schott moves to amend the bill. This is HFA Schott 3-4, number 1.
The gentleman from the 27th, Delegate Schott, to explain the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This amendment simply strikes out a provision of the rule that adds additional permitting requirements on the whitewater industry. Those are burdensome and basically make the members of the industry non-competitive. We recommend adoption of the amendment.
The question before the House is the adoption of the amendment as just explained by the gentleman from the 27th. The gentleman from the 32nd, Delegate Fast.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would rise in support of this amendment. What this is in this rule, tucked as 15.1 on page 19, adopts a code of federal regulation, and that would, in essence, allow the National Park Service to take a primary role in regulating whitewater activity, including a whole nother layer of federal permits. That is not what was intended. The West Virginia DNR is supposed to be the regulatory agency of the whitewater activity, and so taking this out would keep that consistent, so I urge passage of the amendment, adoption of the amendment.
Are there other members who wish to speak to the amendment? Does the gentleman from the 27th wish to close debate on the amendment? If not, those in favor of the amendment will say aye. Those opposed will say no. Ayes have it. Chair declares the amendment adopted. Are there further amendments? If not, the bill will be advanced.
Committee substitute for Senate Bill 237, improving the ability of law enforcement to locate and return missing persons.
Are there amendments? If not, the bill will be advanced.
Committee substitute for Senate Bill 316, preserving previously approved state municipal policemen's or firemen's pensions.
Are there amendments? If not, the bill will be advanced.
Committee substitute for Senate Bill 330, requiring contact information be listed on requiring contact information be listed on agency's online directory and website.
Are there amendments? If not, the bill will be advanced.
Committee substitute for Senate Bill 344, relating to operation of state-owned farms.
Are there amendments? If not, the bill will be advanced.
Committee substitute for Senate Bill 360, relating to third-party litigation financing.
Are there amendments?
Committee on Judiciary moves to amend the bill.
The gentleman from the 27th, Delegate Schott, to explain the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This deals with third-party litigation financing, which is an arrangement whereby a lender or litigation finance company provides funds to the plaintiff in a lawsuit in exchange for the right to collect proceeds when the plaintiff obtains a settlement or judgment in the case. Third-party litigation financing is currently unregulated in West Virginia. The bill would establish a regulatory framework for third-party litigation financing and would enact some basic consumer protections, such as disclosure requirements and an 18% cap on interest rates. What you have before you is the House Judiciary Strike and Insert Amendment, which modifies the bill to provide that unless otherwise stipulated or ordered by the court, a party shall, without awaiting a discovery request, provide to the other parties any agreement under which any litigation financer, other than the attorney permitted to charge a contingent fee representing the party, has a right to receive compensation that is contingent on and sourced from any proceeds of the civil action by settlement, judgment, or otherwise. That's the nature of the Strike and Insert Amendment. I urge its adoption.
Are there amendments to the amendment?
Delegate Malcolm moves to amend the amendment. This is HFA Malcolm 3-4, number 1.
Does the lady from the 39th, Delegate Malcolm, wish to explain the amendment?
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The purpose of my amendment is to clarify the definition of litigation financing or litigation financing transaction in the bill. Without the clarifying language, I am concerned that the bill will not fully achieve its intended goal of reducing the number of frivolous lawsuits because of the fungibility funding litigation financing transaction could be used to initiate and further lawsuits by an individual consumer or a business. As part of our ongoing efforts to curb lawsuit abuse, which increases prices on both the consumer and the businesses, I feel this language will enhance the protection of all. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The question before the House is the adoption of the secondary amendment as just explained by the lady from the 39th. The gentleman from the 27th, Doug Schott.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. While I share the gentlelady's concern over frivolous lawsuits, I'm concerned about the effect of this amendment. If it's adopted, the consumer protections provided in the bill would only apply in instances where funds obtained from one of these litigation financing companies are used to pay attorney's fees, costs, and litigation expenses. In practice, however, attorney's fees, costs, and litigation expenses are typically covered on a contingency basis by the attorney representing the plaintiff. I would also note that according to the website of one of the leading litigation financing company trade associations, which is called Alliance for Responsible Consumer Legal Funding, consumer legal funding is not used for attorney fees or court costs. In other words, this amendment would essentially provide an exemption for the very types of practices that the bill attempts to regulate. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, I urge rejection of the amendment.
Are there other members who wish to speak to the secondary amendment? If not, the question before the House is the secondary amendment. Does the lady wish to close debate on the secondary amendment?
Mr. Speaker, as I stated earlier, the purpose of the amendment is to simply clarify the definition of litigation financing or litigation financing transaction in the bill. I wanted to offer this amendment in committee. However, the busy committee calendar did not afford us the time to do such. I wholeheartedly support any and all legislation for the purpose of reducing the number of frivolous lawsuits or lawsuit abuse in this state. I do believe that the amendment strengthens the bill with the purpose in mind, and I urge adoption of the amendment and would ask for the yeas and nays. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The question before the House is the secondary amendment as explained by the lady from the 39th. The roll call has been demanded. Is the demand sustained? Demand is sustained. Those in favor of the secondary amendment will vote aye. Those opposed will vote no. The clerk will prepare the machine. Has every member voted? If so, the clerk will close the machine and ascertain the result. On this question, there are 11 ayes, 87 nays, 2 members absent not voting. Less than a majority haven't voted in the affirmative. Chair declares the secondary amendment lost. The question is now on the primary amendment. Are there members who wish to speak to the adoption of the primary amendment? If not, does the gentleman wish to close debate on the primary amendment? No. The question before the House is the adoption of the primary amendment. Those in favor will say aye. Aye. Those opposed will say no. The ayes have it. Chair declares the primary amendment adopted. Are there further amendments? If not, the bill will be advanced.
Committee substitute for Senate Bill 373 relating to financial responsibility of inmates.
Are there amendments? If not, the bill will be advanced.
Committee substitute for Senate Bill 481 relating to Judicial Vacancy Advisory Commission.
Are there amendments?
Committee on Judiciary moves to amend the bill. This is H. Jude AM number 1.
The gentleman the 27th, Doug Schott, to explain the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This amendment alters a provision of the bill which said no more than 4 members of the Judicial Vacancy Advisory Commission could be residents of the same congressional district to maintain the current limit of 3 unless and until the number of congressional districts in the state is reduced to 2. Then no more than 4 appointed members of the commission may be residents of the same congressional district. This is to ensure that every district had some member of the commission. Mr. Speaker, I urge passage of the amendment.
The question before the House is the adoption of the amendment as just explained by the gentleman from the 27th. Are there members who wish to speak to the amendment? If not, those in favor of the amendment will say aye. Aye. Those opposed will say no. Ayes have it. Chair declares the amendment adopted. Are there further amendments? If not, the bill will be advanced.
Committee substitute for Senate Bill 491 extending effective date for voter registration in conjunction with driver licensing.
Are there amendments?
Committee on Judiciary moves to amend the bill. This is H. Jude AM number 1, 2-27.
The gentleman the 27th wish to explain the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The bill as presented had a lengthy provision relating to how the DMV would ensure that non-citizens would be barred from voting. Rather than micromanage the DMV, the amendment replaces it with the following language. By no later than January 1, 2020, the Division of Motor Vehicles shall create a regular process that allows the Secretary of State to fulfill his or her duties as provided in Section 3-2-3 of this code to confirm that persons who are non-citizens of the United States have not and cannot register to vote via the online voter registration portal. Mr. Speaker, I urge adoption of the amendment.
Are there amendments to the amendment?
Delegate Robinson moves to amend the amendment. This is HFA Robinson 3-4.
Does the gentleman at 36 wish to explain the amendment, the secondary amendment? Gentleman may proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So I reached out to the Secretary of State's office just to see what they're doing right now with voter registration. It seems to be that they're doing a lot, and they're expending a lot of money to get people to register to vote. So I want to detail a couple of those things for you before I get to my amendment. So the Secretary of State mailed out voter registration information to approximately 376,362 West Virginia residents as of December 8th, 2017. Additional voter registration information mailed in 2018 to eligible but unregistered voters before the 2018 general election. That was 43,424 pieces of mail that was sent out. There was voter registration drives in numerous different places, in the high schools, at the West Virginia State Fair, public events, unregistered voters mailings to, again, over 400,000 people. We offer the Jennings Randolph Award to high schools that can register 100% of their eligible voters. Now, in addition, they weren't able to give me an exact number of what is expended in a cost amount, but they gave me a couple numbers that don't total the total amount. Now, first off, they have, for their statewide voter registration system, they spend about $162,000 just for hosting, security, and maintenance, just in fiscal year 2018. For electronic registration information, they have a couple payments since 2016, approximately $96,000, roughly $25,000 per year for electronic voters. Then in addition to that, on their statewide voter registration system, they have a total of $236,280 expended in addition to the other amounts that I noted. As you can see here, there's various charges that go above and beyond that, and I believe the number is going to get over a couple $1 million that are expended for voter registration. Now, in 2015, West Virginia launched the electronic voter registration system. And then also in 2015, we implemented the online voter registration, all to get people registered to vote. So it makes it easier for people to reach out and be able to vote on election day. Because I know you've had that instance where you reached out to one of your friends or colleagues or family members and said, hey, I want to make sure you go vote on election day. And they said, well, you know what, I'm not registered. Well, what automatic voter registration does is it makes someone opt out of being registered to vote. So instead of going to the DMV and getting a new license, you just check a box that you don't want to be registered to vote. Now, what we do now is make people opt in. So this system would encourage people to get out and vote. In 2016, we reached out and as a legislative body, we passed a bill. Not myself, I wasn't here, but the people that were passed a bill to the governor and he signed it. So in 2016, we were the second state to pass a bill that created automatic voter registration. Now, it's now 2019, February 2019. Automatic voter registration has not been implemented. So my first year in the legislature, I was approached by a group and they said, hey, look, we don't have everything worked out yet. Let's just push it back to July 2019. Let us get past the 18 election and we'll implement this. It's going to be great. We'll get it done. No problems. Well, the other day in committee, the same people came back and said, look, it's not ready. We need a little more time. We need a little more money. We've got to get it done. But, let's do it in 2021. Let's get past another election. All this is, people, is someone not having to check a box to be registered to vote. It's not complicated. But unfortunately, we've allowed departments in the state of West Virginia to tell us, even though we pass legislation and tell them to do something, no thanks, we're not going to get to that this year. We'll do it in a couple years. So what I'm asking in my amendment is to push this back, not push this back any further. In October or November, DMV has told us they'll have a new vendor. Okay, so we're going to push it back a little past that July 2019. Let's get it past their vendor system. Also, we have implementation in here to check for citizenship and verify citizenship. Okay, they tell us they can do that by July 2019. But you know what? Since it's in the bill, let's push this back to when they're going to implement that. So we're going to, in my amendment, we're just going to push it back 6 months to January 1st, 2020. We're going to give them 6 more months, and we're going to tell them, make sure we have a hard set deadline that they get this completed. Let's quit letting the DMV, Secretary of State, and other people in our state ignore laws that we've passed here and actually do what we tell them to do. Let's get this implemented and get this implemented quickly and for the next election. Mr. Speaker, I would ask for the yeas and nays, and I would also like the opportunity to close.
The question before the House is the secondary amendment as just explained by the gentleman of 36th. The gentleman of 35th, Dr. Capito.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I urge rejection of the secondary amendment. We talked about this and had a similar conversation upstairs in the Judiciary Committee, and I kind of explained it like this. It's unfortunate, but the fact is we are where we are. It's not a good circumstance, but that really is the fact. We heard a lot of testimony. We heard from the Secretary of State's office. We heard from the county clerks, and we heard from the DMV. All of them, someone's not right because all of them are telling us they're ready, but clearly when all of them are telling us they're ready, but none of them are working with each other, we have a problem. And I completely concede that the gentleman is correct, that we have a problem, we have to get it corrected. But the long and the short of it is we need more time. And this time frame was established in this language that's in the bill as currently proposed, came from the Judiciary Chair in the Senate and the ranking member of the Judiciary Committee in the Senate. They worked together to craft this language, and we have heard that time and again. This bill passed the Senate 34-0, not that we should take our marching orders from them, but there was comedy there. It's a good bill. These parties need time to implement it. We're not taking it away. We're not shelving it. We're not parking it. We're simply giving them more time to implement the program. I think it's a good bill as is, and I urge rejection of the amendment.
Are there other members who wish to speak to the adoption of the secondary amendment? The gentleman of the third, Dr. Fluharty.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm going to rise in support of the gentleman's amendment. 3 years ago in committee, we worked this bill up. This was part of the voter ID bill. Our now state auditor offered it on the floor. We passed it in a bipartisan manner 3 years ago, and yet in committee the other day, we were basically told we need more time, but we're ready. It blew my mind. So I'm tired of rewarding incompetency, which is what we've been doing year in and year out, and just kicking us down the road, extending deadlines, instead of just holding their feet to the fire and giving them a hard deadline. And if you can't meet it, we'll find somebody who can. That's what we should be doing as a legislative body, instead of just going, okay, we'll take your word for it, and we'll kick it down another couple years. Okay, we'll take your word for it. The testimony in committee was nothing short of just pure incompetence, in my opinion, and we should not reward that. I'm tired of rewarding bad behavior, and I think the gentleman's amendment does extend it for a reasonable amount of time and holds their feet to the fire, and that's what we should be doing. If they can't get it done, we'll find somebody who can. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman from the 15th, Dr. Foster.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would urge rejection of the amendment. Something else that has not been mentioned here on the floor is something else we also heard in committee is the Department of Motor Vehicles, who would have to be submitting this information, is also switching vendors in December. So December 2000, they said that their contract runs out in October, switching vendors sometime between October and December. So this may give them from the switchover. I mean, the amendment says 2020, January 1st, 2020. It may just give them a few days or weeks to get this new system ironed out. And I don't believe that's an adequate amount of time. Plus also then we're coming up on a spring primary, and the clerks are also opposed to this amendment. So I would urge rejection.
Are there other members who wish to speak to the secondary amendment before the chair recognizes the gentleman to close debate? If not, the gentleman at 36, Doug Robinson, to close debate on the secondary amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would the Vice Chair yield?
Gentleman does yield.
Certainly.
Mr. Vice Chair, I know we had a long discussion about this bill upstairs, and I believe you were serving as chairman at the time, and to your dismay, I called, I believe, the representative from the county clerks, representative from the DMV, and the representative from the Secretary of State, not once, not twice, but 3 times to discuss this matter. Is that your recollection?
That is my recollection.
Now, I had one overarching question when we did so, and it was just very basic. It was, are you ready? Now, when I asked the DMV, and I asked it many times, and we got down to the very last answer, was their answer yes or no when I said, are you ready?
I think as I stated in my encouragement of rejection of the amendment that I conceded that all of them stated that they were ready, but it became apparent during testimony that they weren't talking to each other. They were just speaking on behalf of themselves.
Now, I made it clear to make sure they told me if their part would be ready. Now, not outside of the DMV, outside of the Secretary of State's problems, I asked the DMV, I said, outside of them, are you all ready to implement this? And what did they tell me?
You probably recall better than I do.
I believe it was affirmative. They said yes. And I asked the same question of Secretary of State. I said, now outside the DMV, if they can get their part ready, can you be ready? And do you remember what they told me?
I think your recollection's probably better than mine, but I think it was yes.
Again, it was affirmative, right? And then the county clerks, do you remember what they told me when I asked the same question?
I trust your judgment.
They told me they'll never be ready. They said that it was a lot of work, a lot of man hours that they were going to have to put into place. So until we give them a couple $1 million to upgrade the Secretary of State system, they'll never be ready. So if we keep pushing this back, what do you think will happen in 2021 if we haven't changed or overhauled that whole system? Do you think the clerks will be ready, or do you think they'll be back here to ask us for more time?
I think I have faith in our clerks. I think they'll step up to the plate and be ready in the time frame that we've provided in this bill. It became completely apparent in committee that it wasn't that everybody wasn't talking to each other, they simply weren't talking in the same language. I think when we get them on the same page and their modes of communications become clear, and we provide them with, and they provide and start talking to each other, which became clear we need to encourage them to do, I think they can implement this. I have faith in our county clerks that they will be able to do it.
So the first deadline we gave to them, which was, I believe, sometime in 2017, what did they come to us and tell us?
It's my understanding that the first deadline was 2017.
Was what?
2017.
Okay, and when they came to us, you and I, our first year in the legislature, what was it? Do you recall their request and what they wanted then?
Your memory might be better than mine.
They wanted more time. They want to go to 2019. We promised we'll have it ready about 2019. So now we're in 2019, and they're asking us the same thing, right?
The bill before you allows for the deadline to be 2021.
Okay. So, I mean, we're already at 4 years. That'll be 7, or whatever the math is, 6 years at that point. Thank you. I think I've made my point.
My pleasure.
Huh? I know. I got this, guys. Hold on. I think we all have frustrations in this place. I think frustrations boil over, but we're all in here for the right reasons. We want to move things forward. We want to get things done. But you know, the real deep-seated frustration is when we work on something for days and hours and sit in here and listen to somebody blow a bunch of hot air about one issue. And then that one issue makes it all the way through the process, a very lengthy process, and then all the way down to the governor's office, and the governor signs that bill. And you're like, wow, we got something accomplished. You know what's really frustrating? When the departments tell you to stick it and don't do what they said to do in the bill. So I think at this point, since we want more people to vote, more people to be registered to vote, we should pass this amendment, put their feet to the fire, and get this accomplished. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The question before the House is the adoption of the secondary amendment as explained by the gentleman in the 36th. Those in favor of the secondary, a roll call has been demanded. Is demand sustained? Demand is sustained. Those in favor of the secondary amendment will vote aye. Those opposed will vote no. The clerk will prepare the machine. Has every member voted? If so, the clerk will close the machine and ascertain the result. On this question, there are 44 ayes, 56 nays, 0 members absent, not voting, less than the majority in favor, having voted in the affirmative. Chair declares the secondary amendment lost. The question is on the primary amendment. Are there other members who wish to speak to the adoption of the primary amendment? If not, does the gentleman wish to close debate on the primary amendment? If not, those in favor of the primary amendment will say aye. Aye. Those opposed will say no. Ayes have it. Chair declares the primary amendment adopted. Are there further amendments? If not, the bill will be advanced. Next bill on second reading.
Senate Bill 519, requiring county emergency dispatchers complete course for telephonic cardiopulmonary resuscitation.
Are there amendments? If not, the bill will be advanced.
Senate Bill 531, relating generally to workers' compensation claims.
Are there amendments? If not, the bill will be advanced.
Committee substitute for Senate Bill 624, allowing county boards of education use alternative assessment provided in Every Student Succeeds Act.
Are there amendments?
Delegate Hamrick moves to amend the bill. This is HFA Hamrick 3-4, number 1.
The gentleman, the 48th, Delegate Hamrick, to explain the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This bill allows counties to select an alternative testing method if they choose, instead of the SAT as allowed specifically under the Every Student Succeeds Act. This amendment ensures that counties do not have to bear the costs associated with administering the test, and that the state pays for the alternative test just like they do for the SAT. It ensures that the cost of the alternative test would have to be the same as the current contract with SAT. It also states that the state shall pay for the process for the counties that want to use the alternative test, so that the counties do not have to pay for it. Lastly, as we heard in the Education Committee, this amendment will make sure that the test that is chosen will measure our state's standards along with college and career readiness, and that it will recommend the use of 3 different forms of the same test in order to get the most accurate alignment results. Mr. Speaker, I urge adoption of the amendment.
The question before the House is the adoption of the amendment as just explained by the gentleman, the 48th. The gentleman, the 16th, Delegate Hornbuckle.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would the chairman please yield?
Chairman does yield.
Was this amendment ran in our committee?
No, it was not. There was an amendment. There was a similar or close to similar amendment that was, that was withdrawn in the committee.
Oh, it was withdrawn?
Yes.
Why was it withdrawn?
It was, it was my amendment, and I didn't offer it, so, in the committee.
How much will this amendment cost?
As far as I understand it, one thing stated in the amendment specifically is that the test will not cost any more than the SAT. The peer review or study, as I've heard, it's been attested by multiple experts to me that it shouldn't cost any more than $100,000 at most. Currently, the line item for assessments is over $3 million that the State Department has available for assessments.
Okay, so there is or isn't a fiscal note with this?
There is not, no.
Okay, and did the department go through a procurement process for an assessment?
The current assessment agreement that they have with SAT was chosen through an RFP process, yes.
Okay, and who was a successful vendor?
SAT is the current vendor. But as I stated, the ESSA federal law allows for state to develop a policy specifically allowing counties to choose alternative tests.
Okay, thank you.
The gentleman from the 43rd, Delegate Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The chairman yield.
Yes.
Thank you. What other summative assessment are we exactly talking about here? Is this like specifically trying to move in the ACT, or is there another summative assessment that is in mind with this amendment? Because this is pertaining to high school specifically, because...
Yes, I think there may be a number of other possible vendors, but as far as I know, the ones that are considered college and career readiness assessment are SAT and ACT.
Correct. But this would cover any other summative assessment?
Yes, if it was deemed to be, there's no specific test mentioned in the bill.
Measure college and career readiness. Okay.
Yes.
All right. No further questions. Thank you.
The gentleman, the 7th, Delegate Harshbarger.
Thank you. Will the chairman yield?
Yes.
The way I understand this kind of gives our county more of the flexibility on their more local control of what testing they want to do for their high school students.
Yes, you're correct.
Mainly the SAT and the ACT.
Yes, if they chose to go with the ACT or another summative assessment, it would require the state to pay for it just like they do the SAT.
Now, what happens right now if the standard is an SAT and a county is bound to do an ACT? They've got to pay for that, or the parents have got to pay for that first test, correct?
Yeah, currently, yes, the parents or the student would have to pay for the ACT if it was chosen as their preferred test for college application or entrance.
Okay, thank you. Can I speak to the amendment?
Gentleman, proceed.
I ask urgent passage of this amendment. I represent 2 counties that are dug in on the ACT test, and that gives that local control to the Board of Education and that school system to dictate which test is best for their students at that high school. So I urge adoption of the amendment. Thank you.
The gentleman, the 35th, Douglas Byrd. Gentleman from the 48th, yield for a question.
Yes.
I'm not on your committee. Was there any discussion? How many students in West Virginia take the ACT?
Yeah, it was stated, I know it was in the, I think the number was 20-some thousand. I don't know the exact number, but I think that was attested to us from an expert from ACT.
And that is because those are people that are actually electing to take ACT because SAT is what's required right now, right?
Yes.
So are they paying that? Oh, hold on.
Yeah, I don't, okay, was that? So the number I stated to you is the number of 11th graders that take some sort of test. So I don't know the number specifically to ACT, but it is a high number.
Yeah, just based on my quick review, it was over 21,000. Does that number sound correct about who took
Yes.
ACT? And
Yes, I
so
think
those
so.
are students that are actually going outside of what's required and requesting that they take that
Yes.
on their own.
Yes, they're
Okay, thank you,
correct.
Mr. Chairman.
The gentleman, the 67th, Douglas Doyle.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would the chairman continue to yield?
Yes.
You said this amendment is similar to the one that was originally going to be offered as a committee amendment. In what way is it, or in what ways would it be different?
The original amendment, as I remember, I had drafted. The reason it wasn't offered is because it was from some of the questions that were asked in the committee of members. I think yourself maybe in particular decided the amendment needed some work. So I think one of the major changes is that the amendment that was going to be offered in committee didn't specify that the state would pay for the exam portion. It didn't. It just said that it had to be offered. So that's one
you
of the
would
major
regard that
differences.
as the biggest change?
Yes, from the amendment that was going to be
Are
proposed.
there any others you can think of?
No.
Okay, thank you.
The gentleman, the 44th, Douglas Hannah.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Permission to speak to the amendment.
Gentleman, may proceed.
Thank you. I would urge adoption of this amendment. As the gentleman from the 35th said earlier, 21,000 students, over 21,000 students elected to take the ACT test themselves. We also had testimony in committee that out of in-state students, upwards of 70% of those students use the ACT as their college admission test. I think a lot of the students in West Virginia prefer the ACT over the SAT, and for that purpose, I will support the amendment.
The lady from the 51st, Douglas Walker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would the chairman yield?
Yes, Chairman does yield.
Thank you. So are you telling me, is there not a program for children who want to take the ACT that they can apply so that fee can be waived?
There may be, but this bill specifically allows the county to choose this to be their main assessment.
So will the county also offer ACT courses to prep these students to take this test?
Not specifically laid out in this bill. They could, but that's not specifically mentioned in this bill.
So if the students have never been prone to this type of testing, then we want this to be changed. Should we not add this possibly for them to take the prep courses for the ACT? Or let me change that. Will the counties offer an ACT book to the students free of charge?
Yeah, I'm not aware of exactly how that would work.
A few more questions.
Yes.
Homeschool students can take testings with their home-based school, 3rd, 5th, 8th, and 11th grade also, correct? If they choose not to turn in a portfolio on those years.
Yes, homeschool students can participate in the state testing programs, yes.
So if a parent would choose to do an ACT testing, if this bill is passed, and hopefully students would get a free ACT book or prep courses, will homeschool students be able to take those courses also or get a book?
Okay, so yeah, it would depend specifically with regards to those courses and materials. I still don't know specifically on that portion, but they would be allowed to come in and take the assessment just the same as they currently are allowed to take the state's assessment. If the county would choose ACT, the same thing would occur.
Do you know how many students take the SAT in the state of West Virginia?
I know let me, just one second. I know those numbers were mentioned to us in the committee, but I don't know that I have it specifically in front of me. I know there was a high number of students that took the ACT, though, at their own elective. I don't have those numbers in front of me.
So what about students with 504s and IEPs? Because when you do the ACT testing, isn't that a separate request when you need certain things for testing?
So that shouldn't be changed. They would still be able to take the test with accommodations as if required in their IEP.
Do you know what those accommodations are for ACT versus an IEP and a 504 student?
No, I don't. But I would assume it would be similar to the way it works with the SAT.
Do you know the time restraint of when that first request needs to be sent and how long it takes for an appeal process if they deny a student? Is there any accountability that they will approve all students for those modifications with a 504 and an IEP?
Yeah, I don't know the time frame there either.
Thank you, I appreciate it. Can I speak to the amendment?
Let me proceed.
So once again, if we change this to ACTs, our students with 504s and IEPs will be excluded. It is a process for a student to get modifications with the ACT testing. It takes forever to receive the results. The appeals process is also time management. So at what point will you start sending for these modifications? ACT does not give any approval, even if a child has a 504 or IEP. I see this as discrimination, and I urge everyone to oppose this amendment. Thank you.
The gentleman, the 29th, Doug Steele.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You know, when this came up, I'm obviously not on Education Committee, so I talked to my superintendent of schools back in Raleigh County, and they would actually prefer to have the option, depending upon where a child's thinking of going to school or thinking of going to college, it might be more advantageous to take the ACT versus the SAT. This amendment really goes to really further the bill, to give our kids the best options available to go to the schools that they want to go to. And, you know, a lot of these education issues, I think it's important that we talk to our educators and the people in our school system to see how that's going to affect them. And, you know, for all the folks in Raleigh County, you know, I've talked to David Price, and the exact words he uses, we would love to have the option. So I'd encourage everybody to vote for this amendment. Thank you.
The gentleman, the 12th, Doug Westfall.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will the gentlelady from 51st yield?
Yes, I will.
Thank you. Okay. This bill is allowing counties to choose between SAT and ACT. They're not mandating ACT. They're just giving the county option, correct?
I suppose I'm not the chairman.
Yeah,
and I'm not
yes,
the one.
yes. That's. I was on education. Well, that's a good one.
Yes.
I've served in education, and currently, all counties have to use SAT, and some of the counties want to use ACT. They have a local option, as the delegate from 31st said. And I think about 21,000 students last year paid for ACT out of their pocket. So currently, the first test is free. The state has to pay for it, and currently most counties use SAT. So my question is, if your county wants to use this, do you think they, I mean, how do I word this? You're from Mon County, correct?
I am.
Okay. I would hope you would go to Mon County and tell them why you think it's important to use SAT instead of ACT. My county like to use ACT, and currently they can, but they got to use their own expense, and so it's not really doing what I think it's doing. It's just giving the counties an option, so the county can choose which test they want to use. They're not mandating ACT. If it's against what you believe in, I understand, but it's not mandating it.
It's not what it's not against what I believe in. But I'm saying if there's a student that has a 504 or an IEP that needs modifications, and that IEP is a legal document, ACT does not have to follow that.
Okay.
So when will that modification process start? Will it be the responsibility of the parent? Will it be the responsibility of the IEP or the 504 team? Who's going to be responsible for those modifications in the appeal process?
Yeah. That was not brought up any in committee, as you can ask the members. I did not know that. So, but again, this is, to me, the bill and the amendment is really about local control. It still doesn't stop that students from taking an SAT at their cost. I agree, it'd be their cost, SAT. If that goes more in line with the students you're talking about, they can still take that, but they might have to pay out of their pocket if your county chooses ACT. So I understand you brought some things up that we didn't know. So, but thank you, lady, for a gentleman. Speak to the amendment.
The gentleman may proceed.
I think it's a good amendment. I think it's a good bill. It goes back to local control. It gives the counties the choice, ACT, SAT, whichever one they want. And we discussed this at length in committee, and I urge adoption of the amendment.
Are there other members who wish to speak to the adoption of the amendment? The gentleman, the 16th, David Hornbuckle.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would the chairman please yield?
Yes.
Thank you. Is it accurate to say, with the amendment or without the amendment, the counties would still have the flexibility to choose between the SAT and the ACT?
Yes, that's accurate. Basically, the reason for the bill, I think, in the amendment, as explained by Senator Rucker to us, was that, or the bill initially, is just because that process hasn't happened of getting that rolled out, so the counties could choose the alternative testing method. So this makes that happen quickly.
So even if we do not adopt this amendment, we would still have flexibility and choice in our local schools?
I mean, yes.
And is it accurate to say that the amendment is just talking about who shall bear the cost?
It does that, as well as set forth the study from the Department of Education and recommend that 3 different forms of the test be offered so that it's aligned to our standards better.
Thank you. May I speak to the amendment?
Yes, gentleman, may proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen, I think again, with this bill, which I think is a good bill, we have flexibility, we have choice, but the amendment will just simply junk things up, make things more convoluted, and that's why I reject the amendment. Thank you.
The lady from the 4th, Dr. Zukoff.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will the chairman yield? One of the things that we talked about in the in the committee was that we would need to have that alignment approach where we would have to have a study completed so that we could, if a county does choose to move from the SAT that they have now to the ACT, that we would indeed have to have an alignment done so that we were comparing apples to apples on the tests. Is that correct?
Yes.
The way I read this amendment, it says if the U.S. Department of Education determines an alignment study is needed, that the department shall ensure the holistic alignment approach is used to evaluate the degree of alignment. And I thought we had agreed in committee that that was going to happen so that it would be, that you could be able to compare the test results, so you'd have a metric to go by, which is really important for us to measure how our students are doing from year to year. And I thought that was covered in the bill already.
It's my understanding that the department had basically decided that they would do that, that study, from the testimony we heard in the committee.
I just was wondering about why it's in here. If that was, I thought that was already in the bill. That would be my question.
Just 1 second. Okay, so yeah, with the difference from the Senate bill basically said there would have to be an alignment study. Under this, the alignment study would specifically be paid for by the State Department instead of the company that offers the test.
Okay, thank you.
The gentleman, the fifth, Dr. Pethel.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would the Education Chairman continue to yield?
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Basically, I want to make sure I get this right, but your amendment, if a county board of education picked an alternate assessment, then that the state would have to pay for it. Is that correct?
Yes, as the state does currently pay for the SAT, they would have to pay for the ACT as well. And also the amendment lays out that the company offering the alternative test could not charge more than the current agreement with the SAT.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
The gentleman, the 36th, Dr. Robinson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will the chairman continue to yield?
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, were you just telling the minority leader, or our minority chair, were you explaining to him that a department isn't doing what we told them to do, so you want this amendment to make sure they take care of something so we can move forward?
That is part of the reason that it was explained to us for the bill, yes.
You know what? I'm right behind you. Thank you.
Are there other members who wish to speak to the amendment? If not, does the gentleman wish to close debate on the amendment?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think we heard a lot of good testimony today. There were a lot of members that spoke to the bill, and I think those are all a lot of good reasons why this amendment should be adopted. It does further clarify that the department will pay for this test as they do the current test. The ESSA, Every Student Succeeds Act, does allow specifically if the state decides to allow alternative testing that this could occur. And as well, we did hear some testimony with regards to different issues, possibly with IEPs or 504s. It's my understanding that West Virginia was a ACT state for probably 40 years or so, and I know that during that time, any of the any of the changes that would need to be made for the test or any assistance that would need to be given on those tests were done at that time. So I don't see anything that would be different moving forward if a county would choose to go with the ACT or another alternative test going forward. So for those reasons, I'd urge adoption of the amendment. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The question before the House is the adoption of the amendment as just explained by the gentleman from the 48th, Douglas Hamrick. Those in favor of the amendment will say aye. Aye. Those opposed will say no. No. Ayes appear to have it. Ayes do have it. Chair declares the amendment adopted. Are there further amendments?
Nope.
If not, bill will be advanced. Next bill on second reading.
Senate Bill 664, authorizing certain members of federal judiciary perform marriages.
Are there amendments? If not, the bill will be advanced.
Senate Bill 667, creating West Virginia Motorsport Committee.
Are there amendments? If not, the bill will be advanced. Are there further bills on second reading? If not, bills on first reading.
Committee substitute for Senate Bill 1, increasing access to career education and workforce training.
Bill will be advanced.
Committee substitute for Senate Bill 187, authorize Department of Revenue to promulgate legislative rules.
Bill will be advanced.
Committee substitute for Senate Bill 285, relating to sale of homemade food items.
Bill will be advanced.
Committee substitute for Senate Bill 537, creating work group to review hospice needs standards. And
Bill will be advanced.
Committee substitute for Senate Bill 546, relating to healthcare provider taxes.
Bill will be advanced.
Senate Bill 587, relating to PEIA reimbursement of air ambulance providers.
Bill will be advanced.
Senate Bill 617, relating to method of payment of municipal pension security fund.
Bill will be advanced.
Committee substitute for Senate Bill 653, relating generally to practice of medical corporations.
Bill will be advanced.
Senate Bill 675, require DEP create and implement adopt-a-stream program.
Bill will be advanced. Are there further bills on first reading? If not, leaves of absence, introduction to guests, miscellaneous business. Lady from the 49th.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move subject to announcements that the House adjourn until 11 a.m. Tuesday, March 5th.
The lady from the 49th moves that subject to announcements. The House stand adjourned until 11 a.m. on tomorrow, Tuesday, March the 5th. Are there announcements? The gentleman from the 10th, Douglas Chris.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Your Committee on Finance will meet today at 5 p.m. Your Committee on Finance will meet tomorrow, Tuesday, March 5th at 9 a.m. The agenda will be posted. Thank you, Mr.
The gentleman from the 41st, Douglas Hill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Your Committee on Health and Human Resources will meet today at 4 p.m. immediately after session. Thank you.
The gentleman from the 10th, Doug Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Your Committee on Energy will meet tomorrow at 2 p.m. in the Judiciary Committee room. The agenda will be posted.
The gentleman from the 16th, Doug Linville.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Your Committee on Technology and Infrastructure will meet in House Government Organization at 4:15 p.m. The agenda has been posted as well. The Subcommittee on Road and Bridge Namings will meet at 4:05 p.m. in Government Organization. Thank you.
The gentleman from the 35th, Doug Capito.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The Committee on the Judiciary will continue its work on the posted agenda at 4:45 this afternoon in the committee room. And tomorrow morning we will reconvene at 9 a.m. in the committee room, and the agenda will be posted.
The lady from the 49th, Douglas Summers.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Your Committee on Rules will meet tomorrow morning at 10:45 behind the chamber.
Are there further announcements? If not, the question before the House is a motion by the lady from the 49th that the House stand adjourned until 11 a.m. tomorrow. Those in favor will say aye. Those opposed will say no. Ayes have it. The motion is adopted. The House is adjourned until 11 a.m. tomorrow.